medieval cooking, a recipe for disaster, to the intrepid eaters of the past, whose culinary experiments, however questionable, provided us with a rich and occasionally revolting history to dissect. May your questionable meats rest in peace, and may your spices forever mask the sins of insufficient refrigeration. This book is dedicated to you, the unsung heroes and occasional victims of medieval gastronomy. To those who dared to consume the unmentionable, who bravely battled food poisoning with only a prayer and a potent draught of questionable ale, we salute you. You were pioneers, gastronomic explorers charting the treacherous waters of spoiled milk and suspiciously furry meats. You faced down the grim reality of a diet devoid of refrigeration, a diet where the line between edible and inedible was often blurred beyond recognition. You paved the way for modern food safety standards, though probably without meaning to. We owe you a debt of gratitude that can never truly be repaid, except perhaps with a well-researched and darkly humorous book about your culinary travails. In a way, this book is an apology for the lack of modern conveniences available to you, the medieval cooks and eaters who were forced to eat whatever didn't run away or run too slowly to be caught. We appreciate your resilience, your resourcefulness, and your astonishing capacity for survival in the face of some truly awful food. Without your contributions to the history of digestive distress, we wouldn't have such a rich tapestry of stomach-churning anecdotes to draw upon. So, raise a glass of properly pasteurized milk, of course, to the truly magnificent, terrifying, and hilariously awful world of medieval food. You magnificent, slightly nauseating, and utterly indispensable ancestors, we thank you from the bottom of our sanitized hearts. And please, keep those recipes coming. From the past, of course. We wouldn't want to repeat any incidents. Chapter 1, A Taste of the Medieval Plate. The air hung thick and heavy in the medieval marketplace, a miasma of sweat, unwashed bodies, and the faintly unsettling aroma of roasting something indeterminate. Donkeys brayed, chickens squawked, and a surprisingly robust flea population conducted a symphony of itchy discomfort across the assembled throng. Amidst the chaos, a surprisingly common sight caught the eye. The rat, not just any rat, mind you, but the culinary rat. Yes, you read that correctly. Our medieval ancestors, bless their resourceful and possibly plague-ridden hearts, didn't just tolerate rats, they ate them. Now, before you recoil in horror and swear off medieval history forever, let's explore this unsettling chapter in culinary history with a touch of dark humor and a dash of historical context. Forget the romantic notions of opulent feasts. The reality was often considerably less glamorous and considerably more rodent-based. Think of it as the ultimate medieval farm-to-table experience, albeit one with significantly lower food safety standards. The economic realities of the medieval era played a significant role in this unusual dietary choice. Food was scarce, particularly for the lower classes. Meat, a luxury even for many well-off families, was a rare treat. Rats, readily available and prolific breeders, became a readily accessible, if somewhat unsettling, source of protein. They were, in a grim sense, the ultimate sustainable food source, but the mere presence of rats wasn't enough. One doesn't simply pluck a rat from a pile of refuse and toss it onto the spit. Medieval cooks, driven by necessity and a surprising degree of culinary ingenuity, developed methods to render these creatures palatable. While we lack detailed, precise recipes, thankfully, historical records offer tantalizing glimpses into these bizarre culinary practices. First, the catch. Rats weren't just scooped up willy-nilly. There was a certain technique involved. Imagine a scene straight out of a medieval slapstick comedy. A group of people, armed with clubs, traps, and nets, engaged in a chaotic, almost ballet-like pursuit of the scurrying rodents. The most successful rat catchers were revered, their skills almost as valuable as a skilled blacksmith's. Their efficiency was key to keeping a family fed, and the skill was often passed down through generations, creating a peculiar kind of culinary dynasty. Once caught, the rats underwent a somewhat rigorous, by medieval standards, preparation process. They were typically skinned and gutted, a task likely performed with less than sterile conditions. Then came the most important step, the disguising of the flavor. Rats, it seems, possess a rather distinctive taste, one that required a significant amount of culinary camouflage. Medieval cooks relied on an arsenal of spices and herbs, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, garlic, to mask the less than pleasant nuances. Think of it as a culinary game of hide and seek, with the spices attempting to conceal the rat's true identity. Success wasn't always guaranteed, but desperate times call for desperate culinary measures. The methods of cooking varied. Roasting was a popular choice, though the lack of consistent temperature control meant the results could range from perfectly cooked to charcoal crisped. Stewing was another option, often with the addition of various vegetables to further mask the underlying flavor profile. Some accounts even suggest that rats were sometimes ground into sausage, a macabre addition to a medieval breakfast. One can only imagine the digestive woes that may have resulted from such culinary experimentation. Food poisoning was a constant threat, a shadow hanging over every meal. The absence of modern sanitation and refrigeration meant that even the most carefully prepared dish could quickly become a vehicle for various unpleasant bacteria. This, combined with the inherent risks associated with consuming rodents, painted a rather grim picture of medieval dining. Let's just say that the medieval version of food safety was rather flexible. The contrast between medieval culinary practices and our modern sensibilities is stark. Today, the thought of eating a rat would likely send most people scurrying for the nearest hand sanitizer. Our understanding of food safety, hygiene, and the transmission of diseases has evolved dramatically. Yet, pondering medieval rat cuisine offers a humbling perspective. It reveals the extremes of survival, the resourcefulness of humanity in the face of adversity, and the enduring human desire to, well, put something in their stomachs, even if that something was a previously sewer-dwelling rodent, heavily seasoned with cinnamon. Imagine trying to explain to a modern-day foodie the concept of ratatouille, but with an actual rat as the main ingredient. The horrified expression alone would be worth the historical analysis. The sheer ingenuity of the medieval culinary approach is undeniable. Their ability to transform a potentially dangerous ingredient into something considered, dare we say it, edible, is a testament to their resourcefulness. However, their methods would undoubtedly send modern food safety inspectors into a conniption fit. The medieval rat, therefore, occupies a strange and unsettling space in culinary history. It's a reminder of the stark differences between the past and the present, a testament to human adaptability, and a rather peculiar chapter in the ongoing saga of what humans will, in desperation or sheer audacity, consume. Next time you're struggling to decide between pizza and pasta, spare a thought for the medieval peasant, happily or otherwise, gnawing on a well-spiced rat. You might find your culinary complaints suddenly seem less significant. Their culinary challenges, after all, were significantly less about choice and significantly more about survival. And that's a thought that can easily make even the most discerning modern palate appreciate their own well-stocked refrigerators. The sheer audacity of medieval rat consumption is something that truly deserves to be remembered and perhaps never repeated. The story of the medieval rat is not merely a historical curiosity. It's a window into a world where survival dictated culinary choices in ways we can scarcely imagine. It's a reminder of how far we've come in terms of food safety and hygiene, and a darkly comedic illustration of the resourcefulness and occasionally questionable judgment of our ancestors. So the next time you encounter a particularly persistent rodent in your kitchen, consider offering it a bit of respect, from a safe distance, of course. After all, it's a descendant of a creature once considered a staple food, though hopefully you'll opt for a more modern meal instead. Just saying, the pungent aroma that hung over the medieval kitchen was less bouquet garni and more bouquet of questionable decisions. Imagine, if you will, a space cramped and smoky, lit by flickering candlelight that cast dancing shadows on the walls, revealing the grim reality of medieval culinary practices. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the combined scents of decaying meat, fermenting vegetables, and a symphony of spices, attempting with varying degrees of success to mask the inevitable. Forget the refined elegance of modern kitchens. This was a battlefield, a culinary trench war against spoilage and starvation. Spices, in the medieval era, were far more than mere flavor enhancers. They were the culinary equivalent of a medieval knight's armor, a vital defense against the insidious threat of foodborne illness. The cost of these exotic imports, painstakingly transported across vast distances, reflected their value. Cinnamon, cloves, ginger, pepper, saffron, these weren't merely ingredients. They were precious commodities, sometimes more valuable than gold, by weight. Imagine the economic and social implications. The spice trade fueled empires, financed wars, and dictated the fortunes of nations. A pinch of saffron could be the difference between a meager stew and a dish fit for a lord, though even then, the underlying quality of the ingredients remained a gamble. The importance of spices in the preservation of food cannot be overstated. In a time before refrigeration, the ability to extend the shelf life of even the most basic ingredients was paramount. Spices acted as potent natural preservatives, slowing the growth of bacteria and masking the telltale signs of decay. The practice, however, was more art than science, relying heavily on instinct, tradition, and a healthy dose of hope. The effectiveness of a particular spice blend depended on a multitude of factors: the freshness of the spices themselves, the quality of the ingredients, and the ambient temperature and humidity. Success was never guaranteed, leading to a culinary roulette wheel where the stakes were, at best, a bout of indigestion, and at worst, something considerably more grim. Consider the humble onion, a staple in the medieval diet. Its strong flavor and pungent aroma naturally masked some of the less desirable aspects of aging meats and vegetables. Garlic, similarly, was utilized liberally, not only for its purported medicinal properties, but also for its ability to powerfully perfume a stew otherwise nearing its expiration date. Ginger, with its warm and spicy notes, was a further ally in the culinary struggle against spoilage, adding both a welcome flavor and a layer of preservation. But it wasn't just about fighting decay. Spices were used to actively disguise the taste of ingredients that would otherwise be inedible. Imagine the unfortunate cook tasked with preparing a dish using game meat that had seen better days, or perhaps no days at all. The application of spices wasn't a mere garnish. It was a strategic campaign of flavor masking. A liberal sprinkling of pepper, for instance, could temporarily subdue the off-putting taste of slightly rancid mutton. A clever blend of cinnamon and cloves could attempt to render palatable the game bird that had undergone an extended stay at room temperature. The artistry lay in the careful balancing of these flavors, in creating a culinary illusion that concealed the unpleasant reality beneath. However, even the most skilled cook could not always conjure a miracle. The medieval kitchen was a place of trial and error, of culinary experimentation, often guided by desperation rather than refinement. Recipes were passed down through generations, often orally, and variations were common. A dish described as savory in one manuscript might be classified as disastrously unappetizing by a modern palate. We often assume that a lack of detailed records equates to a simplicity in cooking, but that was far from the case. Medieval cooking was complex, involving numerous steps, extensive spice combinations, and a reliance on intuition that would astound modern chefs accustomed to precise measurements and standardized recipes. The reality of medieval cooking was closer to improvisational performance art. The range of spices employed was vast and varied, reflecting the global trade networks that supplied these vital ingredients. Spices arrived from distant lands, adding an element of the exotic to the medieval kitchen, creating both culinary possibilities and considerable risks. The quality of the spices themselves was variable, and the lack of standardized quality control led to inconsistencies in taste and effectiveness. One could purchase a precious shipment of saffron only to discover, upon use, that it was adulterated or significantly less potent than advertised. In the culinary race against spoilage, even slight variations in spice quality could have significant consequences. Furthermore, consider the economic realities of spice usage. While wealthy households could afford a generous sprinkling of the most exotic ingredients, the majority of the population relied on more common, locally sourced herbs and spices. These more readily available alternatives, like rosemary, thyme, and parsley, played an important role in both flavor and preservation, though their masking abilities were inevitably less potent than those of their more expensive counterparts. The medieval kitchen was a battleground where creativity, resourcefulness, and a healthy dose of necessity met to produce a culinary landscape that is, to modern eyes, both fascinating and utterly terrifying. The challenge of food preservation extended beyond spices alone. Salting, smoking, and drying were all employed to extend the shelf life of meats and other perishables. These methods, however, had their limitations. Salted meat could become overly hard and unpalatable, while smoked meats ran the risk of becoming acrid and bitter. Drying, effective for certain foods, resulted in a substantial reduction in weight and volume, highlighting the efficiency and ingenuity of the medieval methods, but also the resulting reduced nutritional value. The medieval kitchen was a space of immense creativity, a place where cooks regularly found themselves navigating a treacherous landscape of limited resources, unpredictable ingredient quality, and the constant threat of food spoilage. Spices weren't just flavors, they were tools of preservation, masks for culinary imperfections, and powerful symbols of wealth and social status. The aromas wafting from those medieval kitchens were a potent mix of the delicious, the disturbing, and the undeniably desperate. The legacy of those cooking methods remains, not in our contemporary palate, but in the historical record, a testament to human adaptability in the face of hardship, and a reminder of how far we've come in our understanding of food safety and culinary practices. The next time you appreciate the freshness of your groceries, spare a thought for the medieval cook, battling not only the hunger of their patrons, but also the relentless forces of decay and the limitations of their resources. Their culinary artistry is, at once, both impressive and slightly terrifying. Stepping inside a medieval butcher's shop was akin to entering a particularly pungent theater of the absurd. Forget the sterile gleam of modern supermarkets. This was a visceral experience, a sensory assault on the nose and eyes. The air hung thick with the aroma of blood, salt, and something indefinably off. The walls, if they weren't stained a deep, almost celebratory crimson, were plastered with drying sausages and hams, their surfaces shimmering with a film of something that might generously be called patina. The floor, a mosaic of sawdust, spilled meat juices, and the occasional stray bone crunched ominously underfoot. Hygiene, as we understand it, was clearly not a high priority. This was a place where practicality trumped aesthetics, and the efficient preservation of meat reigned supreme. The butcher, a burly man with hands like cured hams and an apron stained with a history of bloody work, wielded his tools with a practiced skill born of necessity. His knives, honed to razor sharpness, were an extension of his own body, dancing through the carcasses with a brutal grace. There were no gleaming stainless steel surfaces here. His tools were typically iron or steel, perhaps polished to a dull gleam by years of use and sharpening. He'd likely have a cleaver for the hefty task of breaking down large carcasses, a variety of smaller knives for trimming and separating various cuts of meat, and perhaps a saw for dealing with stubborn bones. No plastic cutting boards here. These butchers likely used wooden blocks their surfaces deeply scarred with the memory of countless animals. The cuts of meat available would have varied depending on the season and the animals available. Beef, pork, mutton, and poultry were staples, though the availability and quality would have fluctuated wildly. Game animals, like deer, boar, and rabbit, also featured prominently, depending on the region and hunting success. The butcher's knowledge of the animal's anatomy was crucial. He had to know precisely where to cut to get the most out of the carcass, maximizing the usable meat and minimizing waste. This knowledge was passed down through generations, a practical understanding of form and function as essential as any written recipe. Imagine, for instance, the task of butchering a pig. This wasn't a quick, clean operation. The pig would be expertly dressed, its hide carefully removed to avoid contamination and waste. Then, the butcher would meticulously separate the various cuts: the tenderloin, the loin chops, the shoulder, the hams, the belly for bacon, the ribs for roasting, all the while understanding the different qualities and uses of each. The bones would be meticulously saved, often used for stock or to make bone marrow broth, the scraps finding their way into various stews and pies. Waste was a luxury few could afford. Preservation was the true art of the medieval butcher. Refrigeration was, of course, non-existent, meaning that the life of any meat was fleeting unless carefully treated. Salting was arguably the most common method. The meat would be generously rubbed with salt, often a mixture of coarse sea salt and herbs for added flavor and preservation. This salt drew out moisture, inhibiting the growth of bacteria and creating a relatively stable environment to extend its shelf life. The salting process could last for days, even weeks, and the meat would undergo transformation, becoming denser and firmer. A heavily salted piece of meat could last surprisingly long, although its texture was far from our modern expectations of tenderness. Smoking was another crucial technique. The butcher, or a dedicated smoker, would hang the meat in a smokehouse, exposing it to the smoke of smoldering wood fires. The smoke acted as a natural preservative, imbuing the meat with a characteristic flavor and preserving it from decay. The type of wood used significantly impacted the flavor profile. Woods like oak or apple wood could impart delicate flavors, while harsher woods would lend more pungent notes. The smoke also acted as a drying agent, which further aided preservation. The result? Smoked meats, often quite hard and deeply flavorful, capable of lasting for weeks or even months, but certainly not as tender as their modern counterparts. Drying was a third significant preservation method, particularly effective for certain cuts of meat, such as sausages and other smaller pieces. The meat was often hung in well-ventilated areas, or spread out to dry slowly. The process would take a considerable amount of time, during which the meat would lose significant moisture, resulting in a product significantly harder and tougher than fresh meat, but nonetheless edible, provided it was carefully handled and processed. These preservation techniques were often used in combination. For example, meat might be salted, then smoked to achieve the best preservation results. The butcher's shop wasn't just a place of work, but a social hub. Customers would haggle over prices, share news, and exchange gossip amid the aroma of blood and smoke. The butcher, often a key figure in the community, would provide not just meat, but also advice on its preparation and preservation. His knowledge was invaluable, a mix of tradition, observation, and hard-won experience. Contrast this with a modern butcher's shop, or even a supermarket meat counter. The gleaming stainless steel surfaces, the refrigerated displays, the careful packaging. It's a stark contrast to the messy reality of medieval meat handling. We have advanced considerably in the food safety and preservation of meat, but there's a certain rustic charm, a stark honesty, in the medieval approach. While the standards of hygiene were abysmal by today's standards, and the reliance on spices to mask spoilage would likely send modern food inspectors into a frenzy, the medieval butcher's skill and ingenuity in preserving meat, given the limitations of their technology, deserves a certain macabre respect. Imagine the sheer amount of skill, knowledge, and patience required to skillfully butcher an animal and subsequently process and preserve various cuts of meat, using techniques that are, in our eyes, crude yet strangely effective. Our modern methods are efficient, undeniably cleaner, and arguably safer, but they lack the visceral drama, the sheer, raw intensity of a medieval butcher's shop. The next time you pick up a neatly packaged steak, spare a thought for the medieval butcher, battling not only the sharp edges of his knives, but also the relentless decay of the meat before him. His work, however rough around the edges, was as essential then as our sophisticated methods are now. The difference is merely a matter of degree and of our significantly reduced tolerance for questionable smells. The aroma hitting you first wasn't the comforting yeasty scent of a modern bakery. Oh no, this was a different beast altogether. Stepping into a medieval bakery was like entering a dimly lit, slightly damp cave where the air hung heavy with the scent of overripe fruit, fermenting grains, and a persistent underlying tang that could only be described as ancient. Forget the pristine white tiles and stainless steel of today's bakeries. The walls of this establishment were a patchwork of soot-stained stone and crumbling plaster, their surfaces dusted with a fine layer of flour that had likely been there for weeks, maybe months. The floor, uneven and packed earth, was liberally strewn with stray grains, discarded crusts, and a disconcerting amount of what one could only politely hope was spilled flour. The baker, a woman whose face was etched with the lines of hard work and countless sunrises, moved with a practiced efficiency that belied her apparent age. Her hands, gnarled and strong, kneaded the dough with a rhythmic certainty, a ballet of flour and muscle honed by years of experience. She wore a flour-dusted apron, its fabric thick and coarse, testament to the countless loaves it had witnessed emerge from her capable hands. Her oven, a behemoth of brick and clay, occupied a significant portion of the bakery, its maw a gaping, fire-lit cavern that promised both sustenance and potential disaster. Unlike our modern electrically controlled ovens with precise temperature settings, this was a temperamental beast requiring constant vigilance and intimate understanding. Modern bakers pride themselves on the precision and artistry of their craft. Medieval baking was more about survival and sheer willpower. No fancy temperature gauges here. The baker relied on her intuition, judging the oven's heat by the color of the flames and the feel of the air. A slight misjudgment could mean the difference between a perfectly risen loaf and a charred, inedible brick. There were no electric mixers to whip up airy batters. The baker's arms were the primary mixing tools, tirelessly working the dough until it reached the desired consistency. Even the ingredients were a far cry from our modern standards. Forget the carefully refined flours of today. Medieval bakers worked with whatever grains were available, often coarse, irregularly ground, and sometimes containing more grit than one might find desirable in their bread. The types of bread varied widely, depending on the ingredients and the baker's skill. The most common was a simple bread, often made from a mixture of wheat and rye, or sometimes just one or the other, depending on what the harvest yielded that year. This bread was rarely light and airy, as we are used to. Instead, it tended to be dense and heavy, with a thick crust and a somewhat chewy interior. This wasn't due to some artisanal technique, but rather the limitations of the ingredients and the baking process. The lack of proper leavening agents meant the bread often lacked the light, fluffy texture we associate with modern loaves. Instead, the loaves frequently bore a resemblance to dense bricks rather than airy, delicate pastries. Think of it, a loaf of bread that resembled a brick in both its texture and its ability to efficiently stop a swinging axe. While certainly filling, it was likely rather bland and certainly devoid of the subtle nuances of flavor we've come to appreciate in modern bread. Let's not forget that medieval hygiene standards were flexible, to put it mildly. Spices were not just for flavor. They were often a crucial element in masking the slightly off notes of stale or improperly stored flour. Imagine the audacity of modern culinary standards, where a hint of off flavor warrants an immediate discard. In the medieval world, it was merely a minor detail to be overpowered with a generous amount of readily available spices like cloves and cumin. Beyond the simple bread, there were variations, depending on available ingredients and local traditions. Some breads incorporated herbs or nuts. Others added fruits, such as raisins or currants, depending on the season. But even these fancier versions were a far cry from the delicate pastries of today. The addition of fruits or nuts wasn't always for taste enhancement. Often, these additions served as extra sources of calories and nutrients that allowed a longer shelf life, which was desperately needed in times of sporadic harvest yields. These ingredients, while adding a bit of sweetness, served to both improve the nutritional value and extend the relatively short lifespan of the bread. This wasn't the artisan baking of today. It was a pragmatic, life-sustaining activity, the success or failure of which determined whether a family went hungry or not. One of the most common and frankly most alarming aspects of medieval bread was its tendency towards staleness. There was no modern refrigeration, no efficient preservation techniques to keep bread fresh. The bread was often stale before it ever left the bakery, with the best loaves being those consumed the day of baking. A day-old loaf might be passable, but after a few days, it became a hard, rock-like substance that defied even the most determined jaw muscles. However, this did not mean that it was necessarily discarded. Stale bread, often hard enough to be used as a weapon, found its way into numerous dishes, adding a gritty texture and a dull crunch to stews, soups, and porridges. It was a staple both for its provision of carbohydrates and for the ingenious, if desperate, means it provided for food preservation. This practice wasn't always a matter of choice. It was a simple reality of life, where wasting a single crumb could mean the difference between survival and starvation. The medieval bakery wasn't just a place of production, it was also a social hub. Neighbors would gather, chatting and gossiping while waiting for their loaves to be baked. The baker, a figure of authority and respect, would often offer advice and share news, her oven the focal point of the neighborhood's social life. It was here that news spread, relationships blossomed, and community bonds formed. Imagine the sounds: the rhythmic thud of the baker's fist pounding dough, the crackle of the fire in the oven, the murmur of conversations, a scene of everyday life that contrasted sharply with the sterile silence of a modern bakery. The symbolic significance of bread in medieval society should also not be overlooked. It was the staff of life, a symbol of nourishment, prosperity, and community. It was often central to religious ceremonies and rituals, embodying the essence of sustenance and the bounty of the earth. While the quality and freshness might fall dramatically short of modern expectations, its role in providing sustenance, a sense of belonging, and deeply ingrained social connections should not be downplayed. So, the next time you bite into a perfectly crisp, airy baguette, spare a thought for the medieval baker. Their tools were crude, their ingredients often questionable, and their results, well, let's just say they were far more filling than appetizing. Yet, they fed their communities, they maintained a social center, and they perpetuated a critical aspect of daily life through dedication and sheer persistence. Their bread was a monument to the perseverance of humankind, even if it had the texture of a particularly dense and unforgiving rock. They may have lacked the modern technology, but what they certainly didn't lack was an incredible amount of resilience. They were certainly not the most charming bakers by modern standards, but theirs was a vital role in the medieval world, regardless of the dubious quality of the products themselves. And that is a dark, yet surprisingly delectable thing to ponder over a slice of perfectly toasted sourdough. The great hall echoed with the boisterous clang of tankards and the muffled shouts of boisterous nobles. Tapestries depicting scenes of hunts and mythical beasts that probably tasted far less mythical than the tapestries suggested hung heavy in the dimly lit space, barely concealing the damp stone walls. This was no fairy tale banquet. This was the real deal, a medieval feast, and if you were unfortunate enough to be a lower-ranking guest, it showed. The air hung thick with the aroma of roasted meat, or at least something approximating roasted meat. A symphony of smells assaulted the senses, the pungent perfume of overripe fruit attempting to mask the slightly off notes of aged game, the yeasty tang of stale bread. That day's loaf, incidentally, was probably already becoming a weapon, and a pervasive undercurrent that could only be politely described as the faint odor of questionable preservation techniques. The high table, laden with extravagant displays of food, was a stark contrast to the meager fare served to the lower ranks. The nobility gorged themselves on what passed for delicacies: swan, peacock, boar, all meticulously, or not so meticulously, prepared in ways that would send a modern chef fleeing for the hills. These dishes were not merely presented, they were works of art, or at least attempts at them. Intricate carvings, often featuring more plumage than actual edible meat, adorned the platters. The presentation, a meticulous display of wealth and power, was a far cry from the nutritional value. Let's talk about the swan. Picture this: a roasted swan, its feathers painstakingly arranged, a symbol of grace and elegance. The reality, however, was far less glamorous. Medieval swans were likely quite tough, and the culinary techniques of the time didn't exactly lend themselves to tenderizing such a bird. The result? A dry, stringy piece of fowl that likely required the combined efforts of an entire table to tear apart, and whose taste might be politely classified as earthy. The peacock was another matter entirely. These birds, symbols of royalty, were primarily prized for their plumage, and the resulting culinary catastrophe was often served more as a statement than a meal. The meat, frankly, was considered inedible by most modern palates. The sheer effort involved in preparing it, plucking, gutting, and painstakingly reconstructing the majestic bird in a way that would ensure it still looked vaguely like a peacock, was only rivaled by its truly dubious taste. Then there was the boar, roasted, often to a crisp, far beyond the acceptable range of well done. It presented a formidable challenge to even the most determined teeth. Think less juicy roast and more geological formation, a dense, unyielding mass that stubbornly resisted the efforts of knives and forks, assuming, of course, the existence of the latter. The spices, liberally applied to mask the less than fresh taste, often had more pungent presence than the meat itself. The lower tables, however, offered a vastly different culinary experience. Their plates were heaped with stews, thick, unidentifiable mixtures of leftover meats, grains, and an alarming quantity of vegetables. The vegetables, whatever they once were likely boiled to the consistency of mush. Bread, stale and hard enough to double as a weapon, was a ubiquitous addition, the only constant in a sea of culinary uncertainty. Meat, if present at all, was likely tough and stringy, and often came from less desirable cuts, or perhaps even from less desirable sources altogether. Hygiene, as you might expect, was not exactly a high priority. The lack of refrigeration meant that food was often left to sit for extended periods, its fate at the mercy of the elements and the various microorganisms that thrived in the pre-refrigeration era. Spices, rather than being flavor enhancers, frequently served as a desperate attempt to mask the aroma and taste of spoilage. A dash of cloves here, a generous sprinkle of cumin there. It was a culinary Hail Mary, desperately attempting to save a dish already lost to the ravages of time and questionable preservation. Imagine the scene: a vast hall filled with the sounds of clinking metal, raucous laughter, and the occasional suppressed groan from someone who'd just bitten into a particularly recalcitrant piece of boar. The tables groan under the weight of dishes, their contents a testament to both the bounty of the harvest and the somewhat reckless nature of medieval food preparation. The wine, thankfully, often served as a very welcome distraction. The risks, of course, were substantial. Food poisoning was a constant threat. An unfortunate guest might find themselves spending the night grappling with the consequences of a less than hygienic feast. There was the ever-present danger of parasites lurking within undercooked meats and lurking in dubious vegetables. The prevalence of spices, while attempting to mask the less than desirable aspects of the ingredients, also came with their own set of issues. In excess, they could be rather taxing on the stomach. The combination of all these factors made a medieval feast a true gamble, a game of culinary roulette where the odds were stacked heavily against the player. Beyond the food itself, the social hierarchy was explicitly represented by the dishes served. The lavish displays at the high table weren't merely intended to impress, they were a tangible manifestation of wealth and power. The food became a symbol communicating social status in a language as clear as any spoken word, a visual reminder of the stark inequalities inherent in medieval society. The contrast between the opulent feasts of the nobility and the meager portions of the commoners highlighted the vast gulf between them, a chasm that extended beyond mere economics to encompass virtually every aspect of life. The great hall, ablaze with candlelight and echoing with the sounds of feasting, is a far cry from the romanticized image of a medieval banquet often depicted in literature and art. The reality was a decidedly more rustic and considerably less appealing affair. It was a potent reminder that while history books might glorify certain aspects of the past, the true story often contains elements far more pungent, far more bizarre, and quite possibly far more hazardous than the idealized versions we often encounter. So the next time you indulge in a carefully curated gourmet meal, take a moment to appreciate the profound advancements in food safety and preparation that separate your dining experience from that of a typical medieval feast, and perhaps raise a glass to the brave souls who dared to eat those questionable peacock dishes. Their stomachs, we can only assume, had a sense of adventure far exceeding our own. Chapter 2, Preservation and Peril. The air in the cellar hung thick and heavy, a miasma of brine, wood smoke, and something vaguely reminiscent of a forgotten swamp. It clung to the rough-hewn stone walls, coating the tongue with a peculiar film, and coating the nostrils with a potent cocktail of aromas. This wasn't a culinary paradise. This was a medieval pantry, a testament to the ingenuity and the sheer desperation of medieval food preservation. Rows upon rows of barrels, their wooden staves bulging with the pressure of their contents, lined the damp walls. Each barrel held a gamble, a wager against spoilage, against the relentless march of time and the insidious advance of bacteria. Some were marked with crude chalk symbols, a cryptic code, perhaps, or simply a record of what unspeakable things lay within. Others were nameless, anonymous vessels holding the secrets of forgotten feasts and the potential for gastrointestinal distress. Let's start with salting, a seemingly straightforward method, yet even this ancient technique was subject to the vagaries of medieval practice. The process, in theory, involved submerging meat, or anything else deemed preservable, in vast quantities of salt. The salt, acting as a desiccant, drew out moisture, creating an inhospitable environment for bacteria. But vast quantities in the Middle Ages was a fluid concept, highly dependent on the availability of salt and the general level of enthusiasm for preserving the food. Imagine, if you will, a vast vat overflowing with a viscous slurry of meat and salt. A pig, perhaps, or a side of beef, its pallid flesh struggling to be visible beneath the mountainous heaps of salt. The process was labor-intensive, requiring considerable physical effort and a healthy dose of patience, and the outcome, a gamble. Too little salt, and your meat would spoil, attracting a buzzing swarm of flies and a chorus of unhappy bellies. Too much salt, and you'd end up with something so intensely salty it could strip paint from a ship's hull. The happy medium was a precarious place to find oneself. Smoking, another staple of medieval preservation, was a similarly chaotic affair. Meat, fish, and even cheeses were subjected to the acrid embrace of wood smoke, hoping to ward off the evils of decomposition. The process was typically carried out in crude smokehouses, primitive structures where the only regulation was the whims of the wind and the available fuel. The smoke, thick and dark, imparted a distinctive flavor, or at least it attempted to. A poorly managed smokehouse could produce something closer to charred leather than edible fare, and the level of sanitation was, let's just say, that modern health inspectors would have suffered a complete and utter nervous breakdown. The health risks associated with these methods were substantial. Improperly preserved food could be a breeding ground for all manner of unpleasantness, from simple food poisoning to the more exotic delights of parasites. Consider the humble salted herring, a staple of the medieval diet. It was often packed and transported with scant regard for hygiene. The lack of refrigeration, coupled with the rather dubious sanitation practices of the time, meant that a single herring could serve as a potent vector of various diseases. A bite into one of these salty snacks could be a culinary roulette wheel, offering the possibility of a satisfying meal or a prolonged period of discomfort. Pickling, a third member of this preservation triumvirate, involved submerging vegetables in vinegar or brine. The resulting concoction often had a robust character. Its pungent aroma could clear a room faster than a plague outbreak. The taste, however, was a different matter entirely. Medieval pickling techniques were not exactly known for their subtlety. The vegetables, often boiled to the consistency of overripe porridge, were then plunged into a brine that was often more potent than palatable. The result was a culinary oddity, more likely to curdle your blood than tickle your taste buds. Spices, those exotic and expensive additions to medieval dishes, played a crucial role in preservation, or at least in the illusion of preservation. Their strong flavors and aromas could effectively mask the taste and smell of spoilage. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon. These aromatic additions were more than just flavor enhancers. They were a culinary cover-up, an attempt to transform something borderline rancid into something palatable enough to be consumed. But in many cases, the spices provided a much more powerful experience than the food itself. Imagine trying to taste the meat under a dense cloud of pepper, cloves, and cinnamon. If you ever get the chance to sample a medieval dish, you can be sure that the spices did their best to disguise their true nature. But the cellar wasn't solely dedicated to the noble pursuits of salting, smoking, and pickling. Other, more unorthodox methods were employed. methods that blurred the line between preservation and sheer desperation. Consider, for instance, the practice of storing food in honey. Honey, with its high sugar content, possesses natural preservative qualities, but the honey used in medieval preservation practices likely differed from the carefully refined honey of today. It was often dark, thick, and possibly teeming with its own unique collection of microorganisms. The food preserved in this manner often had a strangely sweet, yet suspiciously viscous coating. The cellar, therefore, was a veritable museum of culinary risk-taking. Every barrel, every jar, every oddly shaped container held a story, a tale of medieval resourcefulness and the constant battle against spoilage. It was a testament to the human ingenuity and the sometimes gruesome reality of medieval culinary life. The smells alone were enough to tell a tale, a fragrant narrative of daring and desperation, peppered with the faint, lingering odor of impending gastrointestinal doom. And somewhere within those barrels, lost to the annals of time, lay the answer to the age-old question, which of these methods actually worked? The answer, alas, remains lost to history, or perhaps happily buried beneath layers of spoiled meat and unidentifiable vegetables. The cook, a woman named Agnes, whose face bore the map of 1,000 poorly preserved meals, stirred a bubbling pot with a ladle that had seen better centuries. The air in the kitchen, already thick with the aroma of wood smoke and something akin to despair, thickened further. It wasn't just the stew, it was the pervasive scent of decay, a subtle undercurrent to the more pungent odors of roasted meats and simmering vegetables. This was the reality of medieval cooking, a constant dance with spoilage, a high-stakes game of culinary roulette where the odds were perpetually stacked against the player. Agnes, like her medieval counterparts, possessed a rudimentary understanding of food preservation. She knew, for instance, that salt helped keep things from going bad, though exactly why remained a mystery. The notion of microscopic organisms wreaking havoc on her carefully prepared meals was utterly beyond her comprehension. Bacteria, viruses, and parasites were invisible foes, attacking from within, their insidious work only revealed through the unpleasant symptoms they caused, symptoms Agnes attributed to the wrath of God, or perhaps a poorly timed bloodletting. Let's consider the humble chicken. In the modern world, a chicken left out at room temperature for a few hours is a recipe for disaster. But in Agnes's kitchen, the concept of a few hours was fluid, subject to the vagaries of the weather and the demands of whatever feast or famine the day might bring. A chicken, therefore, could languish on the kitchen counter for an indeterminate amount of time, slowly transforming from a potential dinner into a microbial breeding ground, while Agnes calmly continued her culinary endeavors, blithely unaware of the impending biological warfare. The same could be said for practically any food. Meat, often cured with a less than generous amount of salt, would slowly succumb to the relentless march of putrefaction. Vegetables, stored in less than optimal conditions, would succumb to rot and mold, developing an array of exotic textures and aromas that would make a modern chef shudder. Even bread, the staple of the medieval diet, was often stale, hard, and possibly harboring a surprising variety of fungal life. The idea of discarding spoiled food was in many cases a luxury Agnes and her contemporaries could not afford. Waste was a mortal enemy. Every morsel, no matter how dubious its condition, had to be utilized. Consider the case of the mystery meat. What exactly comprised this culinary enigma remained a closely guarded secret, even to those consuming it. It was a hodgepodge of various animal parts, possibly including those that modern palates might find slightly unappealing. Combined with generous quantities of spices and herbs, the mixture provided an excellent disguise for those elements that were, let's say, past their prime. The spices, as mentioned before, served more than just a culinary function. They were a crucial component of the medieval chef's arsenal, a means of masking the less than pleasant flavors and aromas of food that was starting to show its age. A pinch of pepper here, a dash of cinnamon there. These potent ingredients could temporarily banish the subtle tang of decay, creating the illusion of freshness. But the illusion, however convincing, could only last for so long. The underlying flavor of rot, like a persistent shadow, would eventually reveal itself. The methods of food preparation were equally hazardous. The lack of clean water, coupled with medieval notions of hygiene, or the utter absence thereof, meant that food was often contaminated long before it even reached the pot. Hands were rarely washed, surfaces remained grimy, and insects roamed freely, contributing their own unique flavors and textures to the culinary landscape. The idea of separating raw and cooked ingredients was a foreign concept. The kitchen, a place of culinary creation, was also a breeding ground for a variety of microorganisms, all vying for a place in the medieval gut. Even the storage of food was a perilous endeavor. There were no refrigerators, no freezers, no airtight containers. Food was often stored in simple wooden barrels, earthenware pots, or hanging directly in the open. The result was a constant battle against the elements, the insects, and the ever-present threat of spoilage. The cellar, as we've seen, was a testament to this struggle, a dark and damp space where food was preserved, or more accurately, attempted to be preserved, using a variety of methods whose effectiveness was debatable. Imagine Agnes trying to explain the concept of food poisoning to her lord. The lord, expecting a perfectly cooked pheasant, might instead find himself writhing in agony, victim of a particularly aggressive strain of bacteria that Agnes's methods had failed to eradicate. He would never fully understand why his bowels rebelled in such a violent manner, attributing it to either a curse, a conspiracy, or the vengeful spirit of a recently slaughtered pig. The true cause, the unseen legions of microorganisms, remained a hidden enemy. The consequences of this medieval culinary negligence were severe. Foodborne illnesses were commonplace, a constant threat that lurked behind every meal. Diarrhea, vomiting, fever, these were not mere inconveniences. They were potentially life-threatening conditions. And yet, the medieval mindset lacked the understanding to connect these symptoms to the food they consumed. Their ignorance was blissfully unaware of the microscopic battles raging within their digestive systems. Instead, they relied on folk remedies, prayers, and perhaps a generous dose of alcohol to alleviate the symptoms. The contrast between medieval and modern culinary practices could hardly be more stark. Today, we possess sophisticated techniques for preserving food, along with a profound understanding of foodborne illness. Our kitchens are far more hygienic, our practices far more regulated. Yet, reflecting on Agnes and her kitchen brings a strange sort of morbid fascination. Her methods were primitive, dangerous, and often ineffective, yet they reflected a determination to survive, to conquer the challenges of food preservation, using the tools and knowledge available in their age. A dark humor lies in considering the lengths medieval people went to against the very real threat of starvation. A threat that, to the modern eye, would seem far less threatening than the food itself, for in their age, the deadliest foe was often unseen, microscopic, and found lurking within the very food meant to sustain life itself. The late summer sun beat down on the sprawling fields, painting the ripening wheat a glorious gold. A symphony of sounds filled the air, the happy chatter of villagers, the rhythmic thud of flails against the grain, the lowing of contented cattle grazing in nearby pastures. This was harvest time, a period of plenty, a brief respite from the ever-present threat of hunger that stalked the medieval world. Mountains of freshly harvested vegetables, plump cabbages, carrots bursting with color, onions that promised a pungent future, piled high in carts and wagons, a testament to nature's generosity. The air hummed with a sense of communal effort and a shared anticipation of the feasts to come. The aroma of roasting meats, already infused with a generous helping of garlic and herbs to mask anything less than perfect, drifted lazily on the warm breeze. Even the rats, usually more interested in scavenging than celebrating, seemed to partake in the general air of merriment. Agnes, her face less etched with worry and more with a sort of grim satisfaction at a harvest exceeding expectations, supervised the frenzied activity with a practiced eye. This abundance, however fleeting, was a precious commodity, a precious battle won against the unpredictable whims of nature. Every fruit, every root vegetable, every grain of wheat represented not merely sustenance, but a victory against potential famine. The preservation of this bounty was paramount, a race against time and the relentless march of spoilage. The process began immediately. Meat, after being butchered in a spectacle only slightly less gory than a battle, was salted, smoked, or rendered into lard, a process that often involved questionable hygiene and the pungent aroma of something that had lingered a little too long in the sun. Vegetables were pickled in vinegar, a solution as likely to preserve the vegetables as to preserve the delicate balance of the medieval gut. Fruits were dried, their sweetness condensed into a chewy, leathery mass, often mistaken for hardtack by the less discerning palates. Bread, baked in enormous quantities, was quickly becoming stale even as it left the oven, its hardness a testament to its longevity, a medieval equivalent of a survival biscuit. The cellars, those damp, dimly lit sanctuaries of medieval food preservation, began to fill. Rows upon rows of earthenware jars, wooden barrels, and hanging sacks crammed with provisions, a subterranean cornucopia that would sustain the village through the long, harsh winter months. The air within was a heady mix of fermenting vegetables, curing meats, and the faint but ever-present hint of something rotten, a subtle, olfactory reminder of the constant battle against decay. Agnes, armed with her ladle and an unshakable belief in the power of salt, supervised the storage. She knew that even the most meticulous preservation techniques offered no guarantee against spoilage. The best that could be hoped for was a sort of culinary truce, a temporary stalemate in the war against the unseen enemy of rot. The transition from the vibrant hues of autumn to the bleak, gray landscape of winter was as dramatic as it was swift. The fields, once a canvas of golden wheat and verdant vegetables, lay barren and desolate, their previous abundance a distant memory. The happy sounds of harvest were replaced by the mournful howl of the wind and the hushed whispers of villagers huddled within their homes, hoping against hope that their preserved food would last until spring's thaw. The winter diet was a far cry from the summer's feasts. The daily menu became a predictable cycle of bread, often so hard it could be used as a weapon, thin stews of dubious ingredients, and whatever meager preserved meats or vegetables remained. The once celebrated spices became even more vital, their pungent aroma a valiant, if ultimately futile, attempt to mask the lingering taste of rot that permeated much of the winter fare. Even the rats, usually adventurous scavengers, appeared to have lost their appetite, a clear indication that something was seriously amiss with the village's winter stores. Agnes, her face etched with worry now rather than satisfaction, carefully rationed the remaining provisions. She knew that every mouthful was precious, a small victory in a long and brutal war against starvation. The very air in the village seemed to shift from the heady, boisterous atmosphere of the harvest to a hushed, grim expectancy. The daily prayers became more fervent, the hopes more desperate. Every family experienced a quiet dread as their stores dwindled, the gnawing anxiety of potential famine becoming increasingly palpable. The cheerful atmosphere of harvest seemed like a distant dream, a memory from another time, another life. The stark contrast between the bounty of harvest and the stark scarcity of winter served to highlight the precarious nature of life in the medieval world. Survival depended on a delicate balance between careful planning, effective preservation, and a generous dose of luck. A poor harvest could mean disaster, a devastating famine that could wipe out entire communities. A single spoiled barrel of pickled vegetables could mean the difference between life and death for several families. The humor, if one could call it that, lay in the sheer absurdity of it all. The juxtaposition of extravagant feasts and desperate famines, the meticulous preservation efforts that frequently fell short, the constant struggle against an unseen enemy that lurked within the very food meant to sustain life. The winter months tested the villagers' resilience, not just physically but mentally. The stories told around meager fires began to take on a darkly comic edge, recounting close calls with starvation, tales of bizarre substitutions in meals, and the miraculous preservation of a particular jar of suspiciously green pickled cabbage. The humor served as a coping mechanism, a way to deflect the gnawing fear of hunger, a stark reminder of the grim realities they faced. Agnes, through it all, remained a stoic figure. Her face was etched not just with worry or grim satisfaction, but with the weary wisdom that came from years spent in a constant culinary battle against spoilage and starvation. She had seen it all, from the abundance of harvest to the desperate lean times. She understood the precarious dance between feast and famine, the relentless rhythm of nature that dictated the lives of medieval people. And she, armed with salt, spices, and a dark, sardonic wit, would continue to prepare the meals, come what may, ensuring with a grim determination that her community would endure, even if that meant occasionally facing the wrath of God in the form of particularly violent bout of food poisoning, a fact she attributed entirely to something she called a vengeful turnip rather than any lack of hygiene. For in the medieval world, the line between survival and culinary disaster was as thin and fragile as the crust of a month-old loaf of bread. The clatter of pots and pans, the hiss of sizzling fat, the pungent aroma of herbs battling a less than pleasant underlying scent, these were the daily serenades of a medieval cook. Forget the romantic notions of a chef elegantly plating dishes for a king. The reality was far grittier, far more pungent. A cook's life was a constant negotiation with filth, spoilage, and the ever-present threat of inadvertently poisoning your lord, your family, or even yourself. Social standing dictated the level of squalor. In a noble's kitchen, one might find a relatively spacious area, multiple helpers, and perhaps some semblance of organization. Yet even here, sanitation was a laughable concept. Imagine a scene overflowing with activity, chickens running amok amongst chopping boards smeared with mysterious pastes, a cook hacking at a carcass while simultaneously swatting flies the size of small birds, a scullery maid attempting to scrub pots with sand, failing miserably to remove the stubborn remnants of yesterday's stew, a stew that may have been the cause of last week's unfortunate bout of dysentery. The air, heavy with the perfume of wood smoke and decaying organic matter, is almost thick enough to cut with a knife, or perhaps to cure a ham with. In humbler homes, the scene was even less appealing. The kitchen was often a single room, sharing space with the family's living quarters and livestock, creating an idyllic blend of cooking smells and animal odors that would make even the most hardened modern chef reach for their gas mask. Sanitation was a luxury for the nobility, largely absent from these homes, resulting in cooking conditions that would make even the most seasoned health inspector flee in terror and promptly change professions. The cook, often a woman burdened with multiple roles, worked tirelessly, her hands chapped and raw, her clothes permanently stained with the evidence of countless meals. Her skills were honed not in culinary schools, but in the crucible of necessity. She possessed an uncanny ability to transform questionable ingredients into something edible, a talent honed over years of battling against spoiled food, limited resources, and the ever-present threat of starvation. Their skills extended beyond simply cooking. Medieval cooks were masters of preservation, employing a variety of techniques to extend the shelf life of food in the absence of refrigeration, salting, smoking, pickling, drying. These were not mere culinary techniques, but essential survival skills. They were also resourceful herbalists, utilizing herbs and spices, not just for flavor, but also for their preservative and medicinal properties. A good cook was a chemist, a physician, and a food preservationist all rolled into one. The daily routine of a cook was a relentless cycle of preparation, cooking, and cleaning, a cycle often interrupted by the sudden arrival of unexpected guests or the equally unexpected discovery of a rat nest conveniently located within the flour barrel. They had to be adaptable, creative, and incredibly resilient. A sudden shortage of one ingredient demanded quick thinking and improvisation, often leading to culinary concoctions that would challenge even the most adventurous modern palate. The ingenuity involved in turning a handful of overripe berries, a few wilted vegetables, and a suspiciously slimy piece of meat into a palatable meal was nothing short of miraculous. Let's not forget the tools of their trade. Forget fancy gadgets. Medieval cooking relied on rudimentary equipment, heavy iron pots, wooden spoons, knives honed to a razor sharpness, and a robust constitution to withstand the physical demands of the job. The ovens, usually fueled by wood, required meticulous attention, their unpredictable temperatures demanding both skill and patience. Many a cook had to contend with capricious hearths, either too hot or too cold, each adjustment requiring more hard work than the actual cooking itself. Beyond the physical challenges, the medieval cook faced social pressures. In noble households, they were often at the mercy of capricious masters and demanding guests, their culinary creations subject to harsh criticism. A poorly cooked dish could result in anything from a verbal reprimand to a dismissal, potentially leading to a downward spiral of social and economic hardship. The constant fear of displeasing one's employers added a significant layer of stress to an already demanding job. Yet, amidst the dirt, the chaos, and the constant threat of spoilage, there was a certain camaraderie amongst cooks. They shared recipes, traded tips, and commiserated over spoiled batches and demanding patrons. They were the unsung heroes of the medieval world, their culinary skills essential to the survival of their families and communities. Their stories, far from being romantic tales of culinary artistry, are a testament to human resilience, resourcefulness, and the surprising ability to find humor in the face of adversity. After all, what's a little dysentery among friends? Consider the culinary challenges. A plague sweeps through the village, decimating the poultry population. The cook must replace the expected chicken stew with something equally nourishing, perhaps relying on pigeons, rabbits, possibly caught by rather questionable methods, or even a less appealing medley of vegetables and grains. The resulting dish, while perhaps lacking in elegant presentation, likely possessed a character all its own, a testament to the cook's ability to improvise and overcome. The tale itself could become a darkly humorous legend shared among generations of cooks, a tribute to their grit and innovation. Or imagine a sudden change in the weather, resulting in a failed harvest. The cook, faced with dwindling supplies and the impending threat of starvation, must carefully ration their remaining stores. Their decision-making becomes a matter of life and death, a culinary game of strategy played against the ticking clock of spoilage and hunger. The result may be less a gourmet meal and more a kind of culinary battlefield triage, but it's still a meal, providing a temporary reprieve in a life of constant struggle. These cooks, unlike their modern counterparts, didn't have the luxury of modern appliances or readily available ingredients. They had to make do with what they had, often improvising with whatever nature or their less than hygienic pantry provided. Their creativity, their resourcefulness, their sheer will to survive is a remarkable testament to the human spirit, and their stories, though often tinged with a decidedly dark humor, are essential to understanding the harsh realities of medieval life, the constant struggle for sustenance, and the ingenuity of those who kept their communities fed, one questionable stew at a time. The very survival of medieval communities depended on the skills, resilience, and, dare we say it, comedic timing of the cooks. The laughter, even amidst the grime and potential food poisoning, provided a necessary counterpoint to the brutal realities of daily life. They were, in their own way, the silent, unsung heroes of their time, warriors wielding ladles and knives instead of swords and shields. Their legacy is not in Michelin stars, but in the sheer survival of their communities, a legacy etched in the gritty reality of their kitchens and tasted on the tongues of the generations they fed. The air in the gleaming stainless steel kitchen hung thick with the scent of rosemary and something vaguely reminiscent of a damp cellar. Chef Jean-Pierre Dubois, a culinary artist whose resume boasted more Michelin stars than most people had meals in a year, stared with a mixture of fascination and horror at his unlikely guest. Across the pristine countertop stood Agnes, a woman seemingly materialized from a medieval tapestry, her apron stained with what could only be charitably described as interesting pigments. "So," Jean-Pierre began, carefully choosing his words, "you claim to be a medieval cook?" Agnes, whose hands were more calloused than Jean-Pierre's entire collection of chef's knives, chuckled. "Cook? I was more of a culinary alchemist, a food preservationist, a miracle worker, depending on the outcome, of course." She gestured to a slightly charred wooden spoon, clutched in her hand like a prized battle axe. "This, my friend, has seen more action than your fanciest whisk." Jean-Pierre suppressed a shudder. The debate had begun, a clash of culinary cultures as epic as any medieval battle. He'd organized this historical culinary comparison as a bit of a publicity stunt, hoping to inject some much-needed excitement into his rather predictable life. He hadn't expected the medieval cook to actually appear, let alone to be quite so pungent. "Let's address the elephant in the room," Jean-Pierre said, gesturing delicately towards the faint aroma of something akin to spoiled cheese and damp earth. "The hygiene, or lack thereof, in medieval kitchens." Agnes snorted, a sound like gravel shifting in a sack. "Hygiene? My dear chef, we were busy surviving. We didn't have time for your fancy hand-washing protocols. A quick rinse in a questionable bucket of water was the best we could hope for, really." She shrugged. "Most of the time, you did not want the spices masking the taste of the spoiled food. You wanted them masking the taste of rats." Jean-Pierre visibly paled. "Rats? In the food?" "Ah, yes," Agnes said, beaming. "A surprisingly versatile ingredient. Finely minced and seasoned properly, people barely noticed, except for that one time." She trailed off, lost in a reminiscent shudder. Let's just say the next few days were memorable for reasons I cannot reveal. The conversation meandered through a series of increasingly bizarre anecdotes. Agnes recounted tales of feasts where the main course was a suspiciously blue-tinged pheasant, probably poisoned, possibly hallucinogenic, and another where the bread was so stale it could have doubled as a building material. Jean-Pierre, on the other hand, regaled her with stories of molecular gastronomy, sous vide cooking, and the delicate art of plating. The nutritional value of medieval food formed a crucial point of contention. Agnes argued that their diet, while lacking in variety, was rich in, well, whatever happened to grow in the fields around their village, often supplemented with questionable foraged goods and the occasional stray cat. We ate what we could, when we could. It was often surprisingly nutritious, in its own way, she insisted. Jean-Pierre countered with a detailed explanation of balanced macronutrients, the importance of vitamins, and the dangers of a diet lacking in fresh produce. He ran through a slideshow of vibrant fruits and vegetables, each perfectly arranged and glowing under the kitchen lights. "This is what we call a balanced diet," he proclaimed with a flourish, pointing to an image of a meticulously crafted salad. Agnes, unimpressed, picked up one of Jean-Pierre's perfectly ripe tomatoes and sniffed it suspiciously. "What is this strange red orb? Is it safe? Does it bite back?" Their discussion expanded to cover preservation techniques. Agnes described the art of salting, smoking, pickling, and drying, methods born of necessity, each with its own set of risks and rewards. She recounted the time she'd accidentally preserved a batch of apples for so long they resembled petrified wood. Jean-Pierre, in turn, detailed modern methods of refrigeration, freezing, and vacuum sealing, marveling at the technological advancements that had eliminated the need for such drastic measures. "Can you imagine," he mused, "a world without refrigeration? A world where the fear of food spoilage governed every aspect of life." Agnes looked at him with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Imagine a world where the most exciting culinary adventure is not finding a new sous vide technique, but finding a reasonably edible rat in the grain bin." The debate continued late into the night, a collision of two vastly different culinary worlds. Jean-Pierre, initially horrified by Agnes's tales, found himself strangely fascinated by the resourcefulness and sheer resilience of medieval cooks. Agnes, in turn, was impressed by the sheer abundance and variety of ingredients available in the 21st century, even if she remained deeply skeptical of the safety of certain brightly colored desserts. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues that would have been impossible to replicate in any medieval kitchen, they stood before each other, a modern culinary superstar and a medieval culinary survivor, each with a newfound respect for the other's unique challenges and triumphs. The great medieval food debate had concluded, not with a definitive victor, but with a shared understanding of the enduring human need to nourish the body, and sometimes to make a little dark humor out of the inevitable culinary mishaps along the way. The shared laughter, echoing in the still slightly pungent kitchen, served as a testament to their unexpected camaraderie, a blend of ancient techniques and modern sensibilities, a culinary bridge built across the centuries, one questionable ingredient at a time. The lingering aroma, a peculiar mixture of rosemary, damp earth, and a hint of something vaguely rodent-like, served as a potent and lasting reminder of the day's unexpected culinary adventure. And somewhere, deep within the recesses of Jean-Pierre's mind, a seed of a new restaurant concept was beginning to sprout. A medieval-inspired fusion cuisine, naturally. The menu would definitely feature ratatouille, but only if it's been safely sourced. Of course, mostly. Chapter 3, From Medieval Muck to Modern Meals. The lingering aroma of Agnes's medieval culinary adventure faded only slightly as Jean-Pierre began to meticulously clean his pristine kitchen. He still smelled faintly of damp earth and something vaguely rodent-like, a testament to the unexpected intensity of his historical culinary comparison. But the conversation lingered, particularly Agnes's nonchalant attitude towards food safety, or the utter lack thereof, in the Middle Ages. It was a stark contrast to the sterile precision of his modern world. He found himself pondering the slow, arduous climb towards the food safety standards we take for granted today. It wasn't a sudden leap, a glorious revolution in culinary hygiene. It was a gradual, often gruesome process of trial and error, punctuated by outbreaks of foodborne illnesses that served as harsh but effective teachers. In the Middle Ages, the concept of food safety, as we understand it, was practically non-existent. Food preservation was largely a matter of brute force, salting, smoking, pickling, and drying, techniques designed more to prolong edibility than to eliminate harmful bacteria. Refrigeration, of course, was a distant dream. The very notion of a refrigerator would have likely provoked laughter, or worse, accusations of witchcraft. Imagine for a moment a medieval butcher shop. The air would be thick with the scent of blood, sweat, and something vaguely rotten. Meat might hang for days, weeks even, exposed to the elements, attracting flies and other unwelcome guests. The concept of a cold chain, that is, maintaining a consistently low temperature throughout the food's journey from farm to table, was utterly foreign. Spoilage was not a matter of if, but when. And spices were often deployed less to enhance flavor and more to mask the taste of impending decomposition. The sheer volume of spices used in medieval recipes, often overwhelming to the modern palate, speaks volumes about the lengths to which cooks had to go to render their dishes palatable. Think of the infamous pottage, a staple of the medieval diet, a thick stew made with whatever scraps were available, vegetables, grains, leftover meat, and frequently mystery ingredients. The possibility of accidental inclusion of, say, a small rodent was not exactly a rare occurrence. Agnes had mentioned it rather casually, a testament to the casual acceptance of such things in medieval times. The concept of food recalls was still a long way off. The slow rise of food safety wasn't solely about hygiene. It also intertwined with the burgeoning understanding of disease. The theory of the miasma, the belief that disease was caused by bad air, prevailed for centuries. While seemingly unrelated to food, this misconception profoundly influenced culinary practices. The focus was on external factors, rather than internal contamination. The idea that microscopic organisms could could be present in food and cause illness was not even a remote possibility in many cultures. The Renaissance brought a slow but significant shift. The rediscovery of classical texts and the burgeoning scientific revolution spurred advancements in medicine and an improved understanding of the human body. While the connection between disease and food wasn't yet fully grasped, the increased awareness of hygiene, inspired by the renewed emphasis on cleanliness and sanitation, began to permeate aspects of daily life, including food preparation. The 18th and 19th centuries witnessed a significant acceleration in the understanding of foodborne illnesses. The discovery of microorganisms and their role in disease revolutionized food safety. Pioneering scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch unlocked fundamental principles of bacteriology, paving the way for advancements in food preservation and hygiene. Pasteurization, a process named after Pasteur, revolutionized the dairy industry, effectively reducing the risk of milk-borne diseases. The development of canning technologies also played a monumental role, providing a method for long-term food preservation without the heavy reliance on spices to mask the taste of decay. Parallel to these scientific breakthroughs, there was a growing public awareness of the link between sanitation and health. Public health initiatives began to emerge, pushing for improved sanitation infrastructure, regulations concerning food handling, and the inspection of food establishments. These initiatives were often met with resistance, sometimes even violent opposition, from those whose livelihoods were tied to traditional and unsanitary food practices. The Industrial Revolution further transformed food production and distribution. Mass production necessitated new methods of food preservation and stricter regulations to prevent large-scale outbreaks of foodborne illnesses. The rise of large-scale food processing plants necessitated stricter standards of hygiene and control. The sheer volume of food being processed demanded an organized system of oversight, resulting in the emergence of regulatory bodies and food safety inspectors. The 20th century saw the establishment of standardized food safety regulations, including those concerning food handling, processing, packaging, and labeling. The creation of regulatory agencies like the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, in the United States marked a monumental step toward ensuring food safety and protecting the public. These agencies set standards for food production and processing, conducted inspections, and implemented quality control mechanisms. Further research into food microbiology, toxicology, and nutrition continued to refine food safety practices, resulting in stricter guidelines, better manufacturing practices, and a greater emphasis on food traceability and accountability. The development of modern refrigeration and freezing technologies dramatically transformed food preservation. Refrigeration reduced the risk of spoilage and extended the shelf life of perishable foods, allowing for a more diverse and abundant food supply. Freezing enabled long-term storage of a wide range of food items, reducing food waste and ensuring year-round access to fresh produce. These advancements, alongside improvements in transportation and distribution networks, made a significant contribution towards reducing the prevalence of foodborne illnesses. The journey from medieval muck to modern meals is a testament to human ingenuity, scientific progress, and the hard-won lessons learned from countless culinary disasters. The slow, often painful rise of food safety represents a continuous effort to minimize risks, improve hygiene, and guarantee food safety. It's a process still ongoing, a testament to the ongoing vigilance and technological advancements needed to ensure the continued safety and quality of the food we consume. The improvements are remarkable, though, Jean-Pierre thought, a wistful smile playing on his lips as he finished cleaning his immaculate kitchen. He wouldn't trade his refrigerator for all the spices in Agnes's medieval pantry. Although that ratatouille idea, it still had some merit, perhaps with a modern twist. Definitely sourced ethically. Mostly, the transition from medieval muck to modern meals wasn't just about improved hygiene. It was a complete metamorphosis of taste, a culinary odyssey marked by the introduction of new ingredients, innovative cooking techniques, and the irresistible march of globalization. Imagine for a moment the average medieval peasant's palate. It was likely accustomed to the robust, earthy flavors of pottage, spiced to mask the often questionable freshness of its components. The subtle nuances of modern cuisine, the delicate balance of sweet and savory, the exploration of textures, would have been utterly alien. The Renaissance, that glorious age of rediscovery, brought with it a renewed interest in classical texts, not just philosophical, but culinary. Lost recipes resurfaced, sparking a culinary revival, albeit one that still retained a hefty dose of medieval practicality. However, the introduction of ingredients from the New World dramatically altered the European culinary landscape. The arrival of tomatoes, potatoes, corn, chilies, and a host of other novelties sparked a culinary revolution. These New World ingredients, initially met with suspicion, were they poisonous? Did they harbor demons? Gradually found their way into European kitchens, eventually transforming traditional dishes and creating entirely new culinary traditions. The tomato, for example, initially considered suspect, eventually became a cornerstone of Italian cuisine. The humble potato, initially scorned by the elite, became a dietary staple for millions, contributing to significant population growth across Europe. Imagine explaining to a medieval cook the concept of a pizza, a flatbread adorned with a red, slightly acidic fruit and melted cheese. They'd likely accuse you of witchcraft, or simply find the idea utterly revolting. Their palate, accustomed to the stark flavors of salted meats, boiled vegetables, and heavily spiced stews, would be overwhelmed by the complexity of modern flavors. Such a culinary leap would resemble showing a Neanderthal a Michelin-starred meal. The 17th and 18th centuries witnessed the flourishing of elaborate court cuisines, far removed from the simple fare of the average person. These aristocratic kitchens became centers of culinary innovation, fueled by the access to rare and exotic ingredients sourced from across the globe. Spices, once primarily used to mask spoilage, now became integral to the creation of complex flavor profiles. Sugar, once a luxury item, became increasingly common, leading to the development of sweet desserts and pastries that were unheard of in medieval times. The rise of sugar, however, brings with it a bittersweet irony. a precursor to the sugar-laden diets of modern times, which in their own way could be considered a type of modern-day culinary disaster. Diabetes, anyone? The Industrial Revolution irrevocably altered the culinary landscape. Mass production techniques led to the standardization of food production, making a wider variety of ingredients accessible to the masses. Canning and other preservation methods revolutionized food distribution, reducing spoilage and making it possible to enjoy seasonal foods year-round. The advent of railroads and steamships accelerated the exchange of goods and ingredients across continents, contributing to the globalization of cuisine. But, as with all technological leaps, the Industrial Revolution also had its drawbacks. Processed foods, mass-produced, and often lacking the nutritional value of fresh ingredients, began to gain popularity. The culinary trade-off, convenience for nutrition. The 20th century witnessed an explosion of culinary diversity. International travel and increased communication facilitated the exchange of recipes and techniques across borders, leading to the development of fusion cuisine and a newfound appreciation for international culinary traditions. The rise of celebrity chefs and the proliferations of cooking shows on television elevated food to a new level of cultural significance. Food became entertainment, and culinary skill became a form of performance art. This era, however, also saw the rise of fast food, a phenomenon that would have been unthinkable in the Middle Ages, yet one that became a defining feature of modern dietary habits. Fast food's speed and affordability came at the cost of nutritional value, a stark contrast to the medieval diet, which, despite its flaws, often provided a reasonable degree of nutritional adequacy. The 21st century continues this trend. Molecular gastronomy pushes the boundaries of culinary science, employing techniques that would have been considered sheer wizardry in medieval times. The rise of farm-to-table movements counteracts the industrialization of food, emphasizing the importance of locally sourced, seasonal ingredients. And yet, paradoxically, food trends today often exhibit a nostalgia for earlier eras, with a resurgence of medieval-inspired dishes, albeit with a modern twist, and a considerable increase in food safety regulations. The transformation of taste from medieval times to today is a testament to human adaptability and innovation. It's a story of cultural exchange, scientific breakthroughs, and the ever-evolving relationship between humans and their food. The journey from simple, hearty, and often questionable medieval fare to the diverse, complex, and often meticulously crafted meals of the modern world represents a culinary evolution unlike any other. It's a history filled with both delightful discoveries and, frankly, some rather appalling culinary blunders along the way. However, one constant throughout history remains: the human need to eat and the inherent human desire for something delicious, comforting, and satisfying, even if that something occasionally involved a rodent or two. The transformation of taste wasn't just a change in ingredients or techniques, but a reflection of societal shifts, technological advancements, and a gradually evolving understanding of both food and ourselves. From the medieval reliance on spice to mask the taste of decay, to the modern obsession with exotic flavors and meticulously sourced ingredients, The journey highlights the fascinating and often humorous evolution of our culinary preferences. And who knows what the next chapter in this delicious, often darkly comedic story will bring. Perhaps a genetically modified steak seasoned with ethically sourced cricket flour. The possibilities, as always, are both exciting and slightly unsettling. Let's step back in time, shall we? Picture a medieval kitchen. The air, thick with the aroma of wood smoke and something vaguely resembling decay, hangs heavy. The cook, likely a scrawny lad or overworked servant, is wrestling with a cauldron that could double as a small boat. Inside, a bubbling stew simmers, a chaotic mix of questionable meats, wilting vegetables, and enough spices to knock out a small horse. The scientific understanding of cooking, let's just say it was rudimentary. Preservation techniques were largely based on hope and prayer and copious amounts of salt. The concept of bacterial contamination, news to them. In fact, the concept of bacteria itself was quite literally centuries away. Their understanding of heat transfer, while practical, lacked the sophisticated understanding we have today. Their knowledge was experiential, passed down through generations. If something didn't immediately kill you, it was considered, well, good enough to eat. Success depended on trial and error, leading to culinary creations that ranged from the merely unappetizing to the downright dangerous. Imagine trying to explain the Maillard reaction, that beautiful browning of meat that happens at high temperatures, to a medieval cook. They'd probably just stare at you blankly, perhaps suggesting you add more garlic to mask the off flavor of the slightly charred, possibly rodent-infested chicken. Now let's teleport ourselves to a modern kitchen. Stainless steel gleams under bright fluorescent lights. Precise measurements are taken with digital scales. Thermometers, timers, and a bewildering array of gadgets transform the cooking process into a precise science. We understand the complex chemical processes involved in cooking, from the denaturing of proteins to the emulsification of fats. We know that bacteria are the culinary enemy, and we wage war against them with refrigeration, proper food handling, and the strategic deployment of heat. The advancements in understanding nutrition have transformed how we approach cooking. We consider caloric intake, macronutrient ratios, and micronutrient content. A medieval cook would likely faint at the sight of a nutrition label. The differences extend beyond the tools and techniques. Consider the ingredients. The medieval pantry was limited to what the local environment provided, a precarious mix of seasonal produce, possibly questionable game, and whatever hardy grains could survive the harsh climate. Modern kitchens, on the other hand, boast a global array of ingredients, available year-round, thanks to advancements in transportation and preservation. Imagine trying to explain the concept of a kiwi fruit to a medieval peasant. They might suggest it was a type of exotic poisonous apple used in witchcraft. The modern world has access to not only a greater range of ingredients, but also a deeper understanding of their properties and nutritional benefits. Let's talk about safety. In the Middle Ages, food poisoning was a constant companion, a rather grim roulette game with potentially fatal consequences. The sheer lack of understanding about pathogens meant that foodborne illnesses were rampant. Modern food safety regulations, while sometimes cumbersome, are a testament to the vast improvement in our understanding of food safety and hygiene. Think about the meticulous process of HACCPs, hazard analysis, and critical control points that governs many aspects of food production today. A medieval cook might simply shrug and add more pepper. The advancements in technology have profoundly impacted the cooking process. Consider the invention of the refrigerator. This single invention revolutionized food storage, preventing spoilage and dramatically enhancing food safety. Imagine trying to explain refrigeration to someone who relies on salt and cellars to preserve food. They'd probably suspect sorcery or simply dismiss it as an impossibility. Similarly, the development of canning and freezing technologies revolutionized food preservation, enabling the storage of food for extended periods and expanding the availability of seasonal produce throughout the year. This was a game changer for both storage and for those who struggled to gain enough food to see them through the harsh winters. Then there's the evolution of cooking techniques. Medieval cooking was largely focused on basic methods: boiling, roasting, and stewing. Today, a plethora of techniques, sous vide, molecular gastronomy, reverse searing, offer incredible possibilities for creating complex flavors and textures. Modern cooking is more precise and controlled, allowing chefs to manipulate the cooking process in ways unimaginable in the Middle Ages. Imagine a medieval cook encountering a sous vide machine. They'd probably think it was some kind of unholy contraption used for alchemy. The level of control modern techniques offer has revolutionized how food is prepared and the types of dishes that can be made. The differences aren't just about technique, but about culture and aesthetics. Medieval feasts, while impressive in scale, often prioritized quantity over quality. Modern cuisine often values presentation and aesthetics as much as taste. Imagine a modern chef presenting a meticulously plated dish to a medieval lord. They'd probably be puzzled by the small portions and elaborate garnishes. In the Middle Ages, a plate heaped high with food was a sign of abundance, whereas today, plating is considered an art form. The contrast between the medieval and modern kitchen is a stark illustration of the evolution of culinary science. It's a journey from rudimentary knowledge and haphazard techniques to a precise and sophisticated understanding of food preparation, safety, and nutrition. It's a testament to humanity's relentless pursuit of knowledge and our constant quest for better, safer, and more delicious food. And although we've come a long way, let's not forget the dark humor of it all. The fact that we've gone from relying on spices to mask the taste of potentially spoiled food to creating meticulously crafted dishes with ingredients sourced from across the globe is a testament to the progress we've made. A progress punctuated by the occasional culinary disaster. But hey, at least we rarely have to worry about accidentally consuming a rat. Usually. Knock on wood. Let's ditch the questionable stew and the rodent-infested poultry for a moment and enter the realm of culinary time travel. My modern sanitized kitchen, a far cry from the smoky, soot-stained dens of the Middle Ages, is our time machine. We'll be taking some truly dreadful medieval recipes and giving them a 21st century makeover. Think of it as culinary archaeology with a dash of gastronomic CPR. The goal? To create something edible, something that won't induce immediate and violent vomiting. The challenge? Well, let's just say that some medieval recipes were designed more for survival than for pleasure. Our first victim, I mean subject, is pottage, the medieval equivalent of comfort food. Imagine a thick, gloopy stew, the exact ingredients of which varied wildly, depending on what the cook managed to scavenge that day. Think leftover bits of meat, potentially gamey, potentially rotten. A handful of vaguely identifiable vegetables, likely past their prime, and enough barley to thicken the whole mess into something resembling gruel. The spices? A generous helping of whatever was available to mask the lingering scent of decay. Now, the medieval pottage recipe might read something like this, with a healthy dose of guesswork and a hearty pinch of hope for the best. A pound of meat, probably a mixture of beef, mutton, and whatever else the butcher deemed suitable. A cup of barley, some wilted greens, a cabbage perhaps, or maybe something less identifiable, a few onions, if available, and a generous handful of unidentified spices. Simmer until it resembles something vaguely stew-like. Serve lukewarm. Enjoy? Perhaps. Our modern interpretation? Let's call it Pottage 2.0. Forget scavenging. We're heading to the farmer's market. We'll select a hearty cut of beef, preferably slow-cooked for tenderness, and pearl barley, chosen for its texture and nutritional value. Instead of wilting greens, we'll use fresh carrots, parsnips, and celery, finely diced to maintain texture. The spices? A measured blend of thyme, rosemary, and bay leaf, creating a fragrant and balanced profile. We'll enhance the flavor with a touch of beef broth, offering depth and richness. We'll use a slow cooker or a Dutch oven for the cooking process, carefully monitored to ensure perfect tenderness and even cooking. The result? A hearty, flavorful, and undeniably delicious stew, a testament to the power of modern culinary knowledge. Next on our list of culinary horrors, or rather culinary challenges, is frumenti, a medieval porridge that's often described as both alarming and unidentifiable. The basic ingredients were wheat, milk, if you were lucky, and various spices. However, there's nothing to suggest that the milk wasn't sour or that the wheat wasn't weevil infested. The spices were probably used to mask the taste of, well, let's not dwell on it. The medieval recipe, again a best guess based on scattered historical records, might include cracked wheat, milk, possibly spoiled, a few raisins, if available, and a healthy dose of ginger and cinnamon. Boil it until it's vaguely edible. The texture? Let's just say it probably resembled wallpaper paste more than anything else. Modern frumenti, or frumenti reborn, ditches the uncertainty and embraces precision. We'll use high-quality cracked wheat berries, ensuring the best possible flavor and texture. Fresh, whole milk will be used, replacing any risk of sour or spoiled milk. A medley of spices, including cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and a touch of cardamom, will add depth and complexity rather than simply masking unpleasant flavors. We might even add some dried cranberries for added sweetness and texture. The finished product will be a creamy, flavorful, and surprisingly elegant porridge that is a far cry from the medieval original. Then there's Hippocras, the medieval answer to mulled wine. While mulled wine is undeniably warming and delightful, the medieval version was less predictable. Essentially, it was wine spiced with a mixture of herbs and spices. The quality of the wine varied considerably, and hygiene practices were, let's say, less than rigorous. The original medieval recipe might have called for cheap red wine, possibly a bit off, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, and a touch of honey. Heat until warm. The result? A hot, potentially medicinal, possibly intoxicating drink with an uncertain future for your digestion. Our modern rendition of Hippocras, or Hippocras 2.0, involves selecting a good quality red wine, something full-bodied and flavorful. We'll be using high-quality spices, ensuring their purity and freshness. A careful balancing of cinnamon, cloves, and star anise is essential to create a harmonious flavor profile. We'll avoid excess sweetness and add only a touch of honey to balance the tartness of the wine. It will be carefully warmed, never boiled, preserving the wine's delicate flavors and aromas. This modern Hippocras is a refined, sophisticated drink, a world apart from its medieval predecessor. We've covered just a few of the many challenges in translating medieval recipes into the 21st century. Each recipe presented a unique set of problems, from sourcing authentic ingredients to adapting the cooking methods to modern standards of hygiene and taste. The results, however, demonstrate how far we've come in the field of culinary arts. While the medieval cooks may have lacked our understanding of microbiology and food safety, they possessed a unique creativity and resourcefulness, an ability to make something edible from whatever limited ingredients were available. Their ingenuity is admirable, even if the results were often less than palatable to modern tastes. The journey from medieval muck to modern meals is a testament to the advancement of culinary science and food safety, a long, arduous journey punctuated by culinary disasters, but ultimately one that has led us to a world of delicious and safe food. So, next time you sit down to a carefully prepared meal, take a moment to appreciate the considerable progress that has been made in the art and science of cooking, and maybe raise a glass of properly aged and pasteurized wine to the medieval cooks who paved the way, even if they did so with a bit of a less than perfect recipe. The sheer audacity alone deserves some sort of commemoration, don't you think? And besides, even the most disastrous medieval dish probably taught them something useful. That is, unless it taught them to permanently avoid a certain type of mushroom or a certain kind of suspiciously plump rodent. So, there we have it, a whirlwind tour through the culinary landscape of the Middle Ages, a landscape populated by questionable meats, mysteriously spiced stews, and beverages that could simultaneously cure and kill. We've resurrected a few culinary casualties, proving that with modern techniques and a healthy dose of skepticism, even the most alarming medieval recipes can be transformed into something edible, even enjoyable. But let's not rest on our culinary laurels just yet. There are far more profound lessons buried beneath the layers of medieval muck. This isn't just about recreating ancient recipes for a quirky cooking show. It's about understanding the broader implications of their culinary practices. It's about recognizing the leaps and bounds we've made in food safety, preservation, and overall culinary sophistication. Imagine for a moment the sheer terror of a medieval cook facing a dwindling supply of questionable meat, the relentless pressure to produce something, anything, that wouldn't send their patrons to an early grave, or at the very least, a prolonged bout of dysentery. They had to be innovative, resourceful, and let's face it, a little bit desperate. And within that desperation, a strange kind of ingenuity emerged. Their reliance on spices wasn't merely a matter of taste. It was often a desperate attempt to mask the flavors of spoilage, a rudimentary form of food preservation. Their methods were crude by modern standards, relying heavily on salt, smoke, and whatever dubious herbs and spices happened to be within reach. We've evolved past the necessity of covering up the taste of decay, but there's a certain dark poetry in that practice, a poignant reminder of the precarious balance between life and death that hung over medieval meals. Consider, too, their approach to food storage. Basements and pantries were not the hermetically sealed environments we enjoy today. They were teeming with uninvited guests, from rodents to insects, all vying for a share of the household provisions. This forced a certain level of acceptance, perhaps not acceptance in the way we understand the word today, but a grudging acknowledgement of the ecological realities of the time. It's a stark reminder of how our highly controlled food systems are a relatively recent development. Today, we bemoan bruised fruit in our immaculate supermarket aisles. They were lucky to have any fruit at all. The difference highlights a fascinating shift in our relationship with food, from a constant struggle for survival to a level of abundance that is frankly both luxurious and somewhat irresponsible. And what about the sustainability aspect? Medieval cooking was, by necessity, incredibly localized and seasonal. Their diets were dictated by what grew in their region and what time of year it was. There was no such thing as out-of-season strawberries or mangoes shipped halfway across the globe. This created a closer relationship with the land and a greater appreciation for the rhythms of nature. There's something compellingly sensible about a food system dictated by the natural world. Our modern globalized food supply chain, whilst offering astonishing variety, simultaneously contributes to massive environmental problems through carbon emissions, reliance on resource-intensive farming techniques, and the generation of unsustainable amounts of waste. Perhaps there's a lesson to be learned from the limitations of the medieval diet, a reminder that diversity isn't just about the variety of ingredients, but also about the environmental cost of procuring them. Perhaps we could all benefit from a bit more mindful consumption, a more intentional approach to our food choices. This isn't about a return to medieval standards. It's about recognizing that progress doesn't always mean abandoning everything from the past. It means learning from our predecessors' mistakes and applying the knowledge of modern science and technology to create a more sustainable and equitable food system, one that's both delicious and responsible. It's ironic, really. We laugh at the medieval recipes, their bizarre ingredients, and their rudimentary techniques. We marvel at the advancements we've made, yet their challenges weren't entirely unlike our own. We grapple with food deserts and food insecurity in our modern world. We face challenges in creating equitable access to nutritious food for all, while dealing with food-related diseases that have evolved or adapted to resist our best efforts. The lessons of the medieval kitchen aren't just about the history of gastronomy. They're about resilience, resourcefulness, and the ongoing human endeavor to feed ourselves and our communities. The medieval cook, battling spoilage, scarcity, and the ever-present threat of rodent infestation, wasn't just preparing a meal, they were fighting for survival. We, with our supermarkets stocked with exotic fruits and vegetables, our refrigerators humming with cold efficiency, often take that survival for granted. The contrast is a stark reminder of how far we've come, and perhaps more importantly, how far we still have to go to ensure that everyone has access to safe, nutritious, and sustainable food. It's a journey that will require more than just a good recipe. It will require a fundamental shift in how we think about food, its production, its distribution, and its consumption. So next time you're enjoying your perfectly ripened avocado toast, or whatever modern culinary marvel tickles your fancy, take a moment to consider the long and sometimes bumpy road that led us to this point. Raise a glass of properly pasteurized milk, of course, to the medieval cooks whose struggles, failures, and occasional successes paved the way for the culinary delights we enjoy today. Their efforts were not always pretty, sometimes quite disgusting, and sometimes bordered on the absurd, but they offer a valuable reminder of the ever-evolving relationship between humanity and food, a relationship that is both complicated and deeply fascinating. Their story, amidst the smells of rot and spice, is a reminder that even the most seemingly primitive culinary practices can hold surprisingly insightful lessons for our modern world. And who knows, perhaps, lurking within the pages of some dusty medieval cookbook, there's still a hidden culinary gem waiting to be rediscovered, a recipe so astonishingly innovative that it would make even the most jaded modern chef raise an eyebrow, or maybe a stomach, in awe. After all, culinary history is a lot like a medieval pottage. You never quite know what you're going to get until you take a spoonful. Chapter 4: A Final Course in Culinary History. The legacy of medieval cuisine isn't just about dusty cookbooks and recipes requiring a hefty dose of bravery and perhaps a strong stomach. It's woven into the very fabric of our modern culinary landscape, albeit often subtly and sometimes surprisingly. Think about it. The seemingly ubiquitous use of herbs and spices to enhance and preserve food, that's a direct descendant of medieval necessity, a clever workaround for a lack of refrigeration and a surplus of questionable ingredients. While we may not be masking the taste of slightly decomposing meat, at least not intentionally, the sophisticated use of spices in modern cooking owes a considerable debt to our medieval predecessors. Consider the humble pot pie. This seemingly simple dish, a staple in many kitchens across the world, has medieval roots far deeper than you might imagine. While the presentation and ingredients have undergone significant refinement, thankfully, the concept itself, that of encapsulating savory ingredients in a pastry crust, harkens back to medieval practices of preserving food and maximizing its potential. Medieval cooks, lacking our modern methods of preserving and transporting perishable goods, would often encase meats and vegetables in pastry, creating a portable and somewhat longer-lasting meal. The pot pie, in essence, is a testament to the ingenuity born out of necessity. It's a culinary time capsule, a delicious echo of a time when resourceful cooking was a matter of survival, not culinary flair. And what about the comforting warmth of a hearty stew? While modern stews are frequently elevated to culinary artistry, boasting exotic ingredients and precise cooking techniques, their origins are deeply rooted in the medieval tradition of maximizing the potential of whatever humble ingredients were available. Medieval stews were often a potluck of whatever vegetables, grains, and meats were at hand, a ragout reflecting the seasonal bounty, and, let's be honest, any questionable remnants of the kitchen. Their often rustic nature reflects a practicality that we sometimes overlook in our modern pursuit of culinary perfection. The underlying concept, however, remains a base of liquid infused with various ingredients simmered until tender, a culinary legacy as ancient as civilization itself, perfected and refined over centuries, but with its foundations firmly planted in medieval times. Even the seemingly innocuous use of bread in modern cuisine carries the echoes of medieval practices. Remember the ubiquitous presence of bread in medieval meals, often serving as both a plate and a crucial part of the dish itself. While we may no longer use bread as a primary plate, its presence in many dishes, from breadcrumbs to croutons to bread-based side dishes, serves as a silent reminder of its historically vital role. Breadcrumbs, for instance, are a medieval innovation, a clever way to extend the life of older bread by turning it into a versatile ingredient. They add texture and flavor, showcasing the resourcefulness that was a hallmark of medieval cooking. In many ways, bread in modern cuisine is a culinary heirloom passed down through centuries. Let's not forget the sweet side of the medieval culinary legacy. While medieval desserts weren't always refined by our standards, the use of honey as a sweetener often resulted in extremely sweet and sometimes unpleasantly intense flavors. The very concept of incorporating sweetness into food is a long-standing tradition. Medieval cooks skillfully used fruits, nuts, spices, and honey to create sweet treats, which, though quite different from the refined pastries of today, laid the groundwork for the vast array of desserts we enjoy now. The principles of combining sweetness with other flavors, of balancing textures, and creating enticing culinary experiences are a direct line from the medieval kitchen. The evolution of dessert is a beautiful example of how seemingly simple practices can over time be transformed into works of art. But the legacy of medieval cuisine extends beyond specific dishes and ingredients. It's also about the very approach to food, an approach shaped by resourcefulness, sustainability, albeit unintentionally, and a pragmatic acceptance of the limitations of the time. The medieval diet, constrained by seasonality and limited preservation techniques, fostered a deep appreciation for local ingredients and a culinary rhythm dictated by the natural world. While our modern globalized food system allows for year-round availability of almost any ingredient, this often comes at the expense of environmental sustainability. The inherent seasonality of medieval cooking stands as a stark contrast, offering a compelling argument for more mindful consumption and a renewed focus on locally sourced, seasonally appropriate food. A return to simplicity, not to recreate the limitations of the past, but to recapture the awareness and appreciation for the resources of nature. Finally, let's acknowledge the humor inherent in this culinary journey. The sheer audacity of some medieval recipes, the inventive ways they attempted to disguise or counteract spoiled ingredients, offers a constant source of amusement for the modern reader. It's a reminder that culinary progress hasn't been a straight line from crude to refined, but a meandering path fraught with mistakes, surprises, and on occasion, hilarious failures. This culinary history is a constant source of entertainment, and its imperfections highlight the inventiveness and adaptability of human beings. We laugh at the absurdity of some medieval techniques, but those very absurdities reveal a resilience and resourcefulness that's both admirable and entertaining. So the next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment to consider the long and winding culinary journey that brought us to this point. From the questionable meats and spices of the medieval kitchen to the sophisticated dishes of the modern world, the evolution of cuisine is a story of ingenuity, resourcefulness, and an ongoing quest for culinary perfection. It's a story punctuated with laughter, occasional disgust, and a profound appreciation for how far we've come, even if some of the medieval recipes still make us shudder. It's a story written not just in cookbooks, but in the very flavors we savor today. It's a legacy, a delicious, sometimes slightly disturbing, always fascinating legacy. And that, my friends, is a story worth savoring. Ah, medieval cuisine, the stuff of legends, or rather, the stuff of legendary misconceptions. Hollywood, bless its cotton socks, has a habit of painting a rather romanticized picture of medieval banquets, a veritable cornucopia of roasted meats, glistening pastries, and wines flowing freely. The reality, as we've established, was often considerably less glamorous, but the inaccuracies don't stop at the lavish feast. They seep into every aspect of how we imagine medieval eating. Let's delve into the murky, delicious world of culinary myth-busting. First, let's address the great chicken myth, the idea that everyone ate chicken all the time. While chicken was certainly consumed, it was far from the omnipresent protein source often depicted. Poultry, in general, was a luxury item, more likely to grace the tables of the wealthy than the peasant class. For the average person, the culinary landscape was dominated by far less glamorous and often less palatable fare. Think gruel, a nutritious, if somewhat unappetizing porridge, various vegetable stews, whose ingredients often leaned heavily on whatever was readily available, regardless of freshness, and, of course, copious amounts of bread. Bread was not simply a side dish. It was the foundation of the medieval diet, often consumed in quantities that would make a modern baker weep with both joy and horror. Images of medieval feasts overflowing with plump chickens and roasted game are largely fabrications designed to appeal to our modern fascination with elaborate spreads and a tendency to glamorize the past. The reality was frequently far more rustic. Then there's the noble, ever-suffering pig. Poor swine, often unfairly depicted as the primary source of medieval sustenance, are another victim of historical exaggeration. While pigs were indeed raised and consumed, their role has been inflated in popular imagination. The truth is more nuanced. Pigs provided not only meat, but also lard, which was an essential ingredient in cooking and preservation. Nevertheless, their contribution to the medieval diet wasn't quite the monolithic, pig-centric world portrayed in numerous historical dramas. Consider the logistics. Raising and slaughtering enough pigs to feed an entire population while managing the challenges of limited refrigeration and disease control. It's not nearly as easy or prevalent as we are led to believe. The romanticized image of the medieval peasant happily tucking into a pork chop is a vast oversimplification. Let's not forget other equally important sources of protein, such as fish, game, and brace yourselves, less appealing options depending on the region and the season. The spices mask the rot fallacy is another popular misconception. Yes, spices were used liberally, often in a quantity that would render a modern chef speechless and possibly send them running for the nearest antacid. But it's a gross oversimplification to say that their sole purpose was to disguise spoiled food. While undoubtedly some cooks employed spices to minimize the less than fresh aroma of certain ingredients, the use of spices was far more complex. Spices were costly imports, highly valued for their medicinal and preservative properties, as well as their ability to add depth and complexity to dishes. Their widespread use in medieval times wasn't primarily driven by the need to mask rot. It was about enhancing flavor, providing essential nutrients or perceived nutrients, and aiding preservation. The overabundance of spices wasn't just about concealing spoilage, it was a reflection of the cultural importance of these exotic and luxurious commodities. Let's not forget the pervasive notion of medieval people constantly battling scurvy. While scurvy was certainly a problem, particularly amongst sailors on long voyages, the image of a scurvy-ridden medieval population is heavily exaggerated. A varied diet, especially for those who had access to fresh produce during the growing season, would have provided sufficient vitamin C to prevent widespread scurvy. The prevalence of scurvy is often inflated to provide a dramatic backdrop to the supposed dangers of medieval life. It's a simplification that, while dramatically effective, is historically inaccurate. The persistent legend of the medieval feast, replete with endless roasted meats and elaborate dishes, deserves a thorough debunking. While grand feasts undoubtedly occurred, especially among the nobility, they were far from commonplace for the majority of the population. Most medieval meals were simple, rustic affairs, focused on practicality and sustenance. The dramatic recreations of lavish feasts in television and cinema often create a misleading impression of daily life for the average person. The reality was much less spectacular and often much less appealing to modern palates. Moving beyond specific ingredients, let's confront the romantic notion of the medieval kitchen as a cozy, bustling space filled with cheerful cooks preparing elaborate dishes. In reality, these spaces were often cramped, smoky, and potentially dangerous environments. Hygiene standards were vastly different from what we expect today, resulting in a potential for foodborne illnesses that would have us running for the nearest hand sanitizer. The lack of refrigeration and proper food storage techniques presented significant challenges, further emphasizing the need for resourceful and often unconventional methods of food preservation. The cinematic portrayals of the medieval kitchen are often wildly misleading. Instead of gleaming copper pots and well organized shelves, imagine a dark, smoky room with primitive cooking implements, a chaotic array of ingredients, and the lingering scent of something akin to old gym socks mixed with roasted meat. The chef is more likely a cook or even a kitchen maid, working tirelessly in less than ideal conditions. In short, it was a far cry from the refined culinary environments depicted in fictional works. The truth is, medieval food was a reflection of its time, a mix of ingenuity, necessity, and a healthy dose of what we would today consider to be questionable hygiene practices. The myths and misconceptions surrounding medieval cuisine, often perpetuated by dramatic portrayals in popular culture, serve to obscure the true nature of medieval eating. It wasn't all roasted meats and flowing wine. It was mostly simple, sometimes unappetizing, and occasionally downright dangerous. But in its very imperfection, it tells a fascinating story of human resilience and ingenuity in the face of limited resources and challenging circumstances. A story, perhaps, best enjoyed with a modern salad and a healthy dose of skepticism towards any romanticized depictions of the past. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a sudden craving for a well-prepared, hygienically sourced, and entirely modern meal. My stomach, I'm afraid, is not as adventurous as my imagination. So, we've journeyed through the culinary landscape of the Middle Ages, haven't we? We've dodged the rotten meat, sidestepped the dubious hygiene practices, and bravely tasted, in our imaginations, of course, the bizarre concoctions that passed for gourmet meals back then. It's been a wild ride, a culinary roller coaster of unexpectedly delightful discoveries and stomach-churning disasters. Let's take a final, slightly queasy look back at this fascinating, if somewhat off-putting, period of food history. One of the most persistent myths we've debunked is the idea of the great medieval feast. Forget the romanticized images of lavish banquets overflowing with roasted swans and spiced wines. For most people, daily life was a far cry from such extravagance. Their meals were humble, often monotonous, and dictated by what was readily available, often whatever could be foraged, grown, or scavenged. The focus wasn't on culinary artistry, but sheer survival. And let's be honest, even the occasional feast for the nobility wouldn't necessarily meet our modern standards of culinary excellence or hygiene. Imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of transporting and preserving enough food for a truly grand event. It must have been a Herculean task, potentially leading to many a case of unfortunate food poisoning. The very idea of food safety, as we understand it today, was a concept largely unknown in medieval times. Perhaps that's why their banquets sometimes involved copious amounts of wine, to numb the palate and hope for the best. And what about those spices? Ah, the spices. We've discussed the widespread belief that spices were primarily used to mask the taste of spoiled food. While there's certainly a kernel of truth to that, it's a vast oversimplification. Think of it less as a desperate attempt to make rancid meat palatable and more as a sophisticated, for its time, way of enhancing flavor adding a touch of the exotic and attempting to preserve food before refrigeration became a thing. The use of spices was a status symbol, a testament to the wealth and global reach of those who could afford these rare and expensive ingredients. It's less about concealing the stench of death and more about demonstrating access to the riches of the far-flung trade routes. Imagine a wealthy lord boasting about the amount of saffron in his stew, not because the mutton was slightly off, but because only the wealthiest could afford such luxury. Speaking of status symbols, let's not forget the ever-present bread. It was the dietary cornerstone of the medieval world, the humble yet remarkably versatile carbohydrate that underpinned every meal, rich or poor. The quality and type of bread, however, did vary dramatically, from the coarse, often unappetizing loaves consumed by the peasantry, to the finer, whiter varieties enjoyed by the upper classes. Bread was a food that mirrored the societal hierarchy. A slice of bread was, in essence, a statement about your social standing and your access to resources. It's quite a thought that something as basic as bread could function as such a powerful symbol. Then there's the matter of meat. The romantic notion of endless roasted meats is, as we've learned, a myth. While meat was consumed, it was a relative luxury, particularly for the peasant class. The majority of their protein likely came from sources like fish, game, and let's be frank, whatever else they could catch, trap, or scavenge that wasn't actively trying to escape. Game animals, in particular, played a significant role in the medieval diet, particularly in rural areas where access to farmed meats was limited. However, game hunting was often regulated, and poaching carried significant risks. The availability of meat depended on season, location, and hunting success. The reality of a protein-rich meal was often determined by factors far beyond the individual's control. Let's not shy away from the more unorthodox ingredients. While rats weren't as ubiquitous as some historical accounts suggest, the use of unconventional foods, things we would find utterly repulsive today, was far more common than we might like to imagine. Remember, survival was often a matter of making do with whatever was at hand. The level of culinary innovation required to transform something like a rat into a somewhat palatable dish is nothing short of remarkable, and perhaps speaks to a level of resourcefulness that's often overlooked. The creative solutions to food shortages were often as impressive as they were unsavory. And the hygiene? Oh, the hygiene. Let's just say that the medieval kitchen was not exactly a model of modern cleanliness. The lack of refrigeration, coupled with a limited understanding of foodborne illnesses, meant that food poisoning was a constant threat. We've painted a rather grim picture, haven't we? But it's important to remember that people adapted, they persevered, they made do, often with alarming levels of ingenuity. The very fact that a large proportion of the medieval population survived to procreate is a testament to their resilience. This journey through medieval cuisine has been a fascinating, if slightly nauseating, exploration. We've seen how far we've come in terms of food safety, preservation techniques, and our overall understanding of nutrition. We've also witnessed the remarkable resourcefulness and adaptability of people who lived centuries ago, who managed to survive on a diet that would make most modern people recoil in horror. The medieval culinary landscape was a chaotic mix of ingenuity, necessity, and let's be honest, a generous dose of questionable practices. But that very imperfection makes it all the more intriguing. So the next time you sit down to a perfectly prepared meal, take a moment to appreciate the long and sometimes rather disgusting journey that food has taken to get to your plate, and perhaps raise a glass of perfectly pasteurized milk, of course, to those who navigated the treacherous culinary waters of the Middle Ages. May their questionable culinary choices serve as a constant reminder to appreciate our modern food system, even with its imperfections, because frankly, the alternatives were far less appealing. Let's fast forward, shall we? From the questionable delights of the medieval table, we catapult ourselves through the centuries, witnessing a culinary evolution that's as dramatic as it is delicious, mostly delicious. Imagine it as a particularly bizarre and occasionally stomach-churning movie montage. Our timeline begins, naturally, in the murky aftermath of the Middle Ages. The Renaissance dawns, bringing with it a tentative shift towards a more refined, though still occasionally questionable, approach to food. Forget the pervasive scent of aging meats. The emphasis slowly shifts, slowly, towards a greater appreciation of fresh ingredients, and dare we say it, a rudimentary understanding of hygiene. Think of it as a culinary awakening, albeit a somewhat sluggish one. The wealthy begin experimenting with elaborate presentations, a far cry from the functional, if somewhat revolting, practicality of their medieval predecessors. The spice trade continues to flourish, fueling the imaginations and palates of the burgeoning upper classes. Imagine a banquet hall filled with the aroma of exotic spices, punctuated by the occasional, slightly off-putting whiff of something that's seen better days. Then comes the age of exploration, a period of unprecedented culinary exchange. New ingredients flood Europe, transforming its culinary landscape. Think potatoes, tomatoes, chili peppers, and a whole host of other delights, and some not so delights, that forever altered the course of human gastronomy. It's like a culinary game of whack-a-mole, as new ingredients pop up to replace those that have proved to be, let's say, less than ideal. We're talking a global culinary remix, a fusion that's as exciting as it is utterly unpredictable. Of course, the downside is that these new ingredients also bring with them new and exciting ways to become violently ill. The 17th and 18th centuries see the rise of professional chefs, the first tentative steps towards culinary artistry as a profession rather than a mere necessity. Imagine these early chefs, armed with limited knowledge of microbiology and a healthy disregard for food safety regulations, which admittedly were virtually non-existent. The recipes are becoming more sophisticated, but the potential for culinary catastrophes remains high. It's a time of extravagant feasts and exquisite desserts, a world of culinary excess alongside pockets of persistent poverty and malnutrition. The opulent tables of the aristocracy contrast sharply with the meager fare of the working class, a stark reminder that culinary progress wasn't universally enjoyed. The 19th century is a fascinating period of culinary contradiction. Industrialization transforms food production, leading to mass-produced goods and an increased availability of food, yet also exacerbating issues of food safety and hygiene. Think of it as a double-edged sword. On one hand, you have an abundance of food. On the other, you have a whole new range of potential culinary hazards to contend with. It's a period of innovation, but also a time of great social inequality, where access to quality, safe food remained a privilege rather than a right. Canning, preserving, and other advanced techniques arrive to help with food storage, but also lead to some creative mishaps in terms of taste and safety. The 20th century ushers in an era of unprecedented culinary innovation. The advent of refrigeration, pasteurization, and advanced preservation techniques revolutionizes the way we produce, store, and consume food. This is where we finally start to see a serious decrease in foodborne illnesses and a focus on food safety, which is undeniably progress. However, this progress isn't without its own set of problems. Mass production leads to concerns about the quality and nutritional value of food, creating a fascinating tension between convenience and nutrition. The rise of fast food, with its questionable nutritional value, introduces a new set of culinary challenges, a testament to the enduring tension between convenience and health. And then we arrive in the 21st century, the present day. We are in a time of culinary globalization, a constant exchange of flavors, techniques, and ingredients from around the world. It is a time of incredible culinary diversity, a vibrant tapestry woven from the threads of countless cultures. But along with this diversity comes an increased awareness of ethical and environmental concerns. The rise of food sustainability, ethical sourcing, and plant-based diets reflects a growing understanding of the complex interplay between food, health, and the environment. It's a time of foodie culture, farm-to-table restaurants, and a heightened interest in the origins of our food. This journey through culinary history is not just a chronological account of food itself. It's a reflection of societal changes, technological advancements, and the evolving relationship between humans and their food. It's a story of ingenuity, resourcefulness, and the ongoing quest to nourish ourselves, even when the available options are less than ideal. From the dubious delicacies of the medieval period to the highly sophisticated and often ridiculously expensive dishes of today, food continues to play a central role in our lives, reflecting our values, our culture, and quite frankly, our occasionally questionable taste and flavors. And as we look back, it becomes crystal clear. While we've come a long way, our culinary journey is far from over. The next chapter, undoubtedly, will be as intriguing and occasionally as stomach-churning as those that have come before. Who knows what culinary marvels or horrors await? One can only hope it doesn't involve rats, or at least not many rats. Let's take a closer look at some pivotal moments. The spice trade's impact. The spice trade wasn't just about adding flavor. It was a global economic force that shaped civilizations and diets for centuries. The quest for exotic spices drove exploration, colonization, and the exchange of cultures, and not to mention the occasional gastrointestinal upset. Think of the sheer logistical nightmare of transporting these precious goods across vast distances, a task filled with peril and the very real possibility of spoiled cargo, resulting in some truly unhappy customers. The potato's arrival. The introduction of the potato to Europe was nothing short of revolutionary. This humble tuber became a staple food, significantly impacting demographics and population growth. It's a testament to the power of a single food to transform societies, although one could also argue that the potato's humble origins weren't exactly reflected in the culinary creations of the time. Imagine the first potato salad, a culinary leap into the unknown, probably accompanied by a healthy dose of skepticism and perhaps even a bit of vomiting. The rise of canning. Canning and other preservation methods were game changers, allowing for the storage of food beyond its natural shelf life. This breakthrough led to the widespread distribution of food, but also came with a learning curve that involved a healthy dose of experimentation, resulting in a fair share of botulism outbreaks, and generally some quite unappealing food. The fast food revolution. The invention and popularization of fast food dramatically altered eating habits worldwide, offering convenience but also raising concerns about nutrition and health. The rise of the fast food industry is a double-edged sword, offering cheap, readily available food, but also highlighting the often problematic consequences of prioritizing convenience over quality and nutrition. The molecular gastronomy movement. Molecular gastronomy has pushed the boundaries of culinary creativity, employing scientific techniques to produce innovative and often visually stunning dishes. It's like alchemy in the kitchen, transforming familiar ingredients into something wholly unexpected and occasionally bewildering. The evolution of food isn't simply about the ingredients, it's about the tools, the techniques, the cultural shifts, and the ever-present struggle to provide safe, nutritious food for everyone. It's a story filled with triumphs, tragedies, and more than a few questionable culinary choices. It's a fascinating, occasionally repulsive, and undeniably essential journey that continues to unfold, shaping not only what we eat, but who we are. So next time you savor a meal, remember the long and winding road it has traveled to reach your plate. A road paved with both ingenuity and, let's face it, a fair bit of culinary mayhem. So, there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the culinary landscape, from the surprisingly resilient rat stew of the medieval era to the molecular gastronomy marvels of today. We've journeyed through centuries of culinary triumphs and abject failures, of gastronomic innovations and horrifyingly inedible concoctions. We've seen the rise and fall of empires, the ebb and flow of food fads, and the persistent struggle to create something edible, palatable, and ideally not likely to induce a bout of violent illness. Think of it like this. Medieval cooking was a game of culinary roulette. You spun the wheel, hoping for a decent meal, but the odds were stacked against you. The prizes included, but were not limited to, spoiled meat, questionable spices, mysterious fungi, and enough stale bread to build a small cottage. The booby prizes? Well, let's just say that medieval medicine wasn't known for its efficacy. But fear not, dear reader, you've survived. You've braved the murky waters of medieval food history, dodging rotten meats and questionable hygiene practices with the grace of a seasoned chef navigating a particularly chaotic kitchen. You've emerged from this experience with a newfound appreciation for modern food safety regulations and a deep-seated respect for the refrigerator, a true marvel of culinary technology that our medieval ancestors could only dream of. Now I know what you're thinking. After this culinary odyssey through time, you might need a bit of a break. You might even be contemplating a liquid diet, just to be on the safe side. Perhaps a long, luxurious nap to process the sheer volume of bizarre and often repulsive culinary information that you've just absorbed. But before you succumb to the inevitable post-medieval food-induced coma, let me offer you a final toast, a virtual raising of a glass, preferably one filled with something meticulously sanitized and rigorously tested for bacteria. A toast to your incredible resilience, your undying curiosity, and your willingness to venture into the sometimes stomach-churning realm of historical gastronomy. To your adventurous spirit, may your future meals be free of rat-infested pies and questionable dairy products. May your kitchens be spotless, your spices fresh, and your digestive system eternally grateful. May your only culinary mishaps involve slightly burnt toast, and that may even be the result of your own culinary ineptitude and not some mysterious medieval curse. We began this journey with a somewhat apprehensive acknowledgement of the inherent risks involved in exploring medieval culinary practices. The journey through time has been arduous, even nauseating at times, a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of sustenance, even when said sustenance bordered on the inedible, the constant battle against spoilage, the innovative yet often questionable preservation techniques, the sheer number of times the words questionable and inedible were used, the near constant threat of foodborne illnesses. It's all been quite an ordeal. But we've learned much, haven't we? We've seen how food habits and societal structures are inexorably intertwined. We've witnessed the evolution of culinary techniques and the impact of technological advancements on our ability to feed ourselves, even if that ability was, at times, tested to the absolute limit. We've learned to appreciate the subtle art of disguise through copious amounts of spices and the almost ubiquitous presence of stale bread. We've understood that the concept of food safety and hygiene is a relatively recent development, a revolutionary change that has drastically improved our lives. Now, as we raise our sanitized glasses, let us take a moment to reflect on the lessons learned, the culinary horrors we've conquered, and the remarkable transformation of food preparation over the centuries. Let's consider the culinary landscape as a whole, a breathtaking panorama of flavors, textures, and culinary innovations, from the surprisingly creative uses of mold and stale bread in medieval times to the sophisticated culinary techniques of the 21st century. Let us not forget, however, that our journey through food history is not yet concluded. The culinary landscape remains a dynamic and ever-evolving entity, shaped by the forces of global trade, technological innovation, and cultural exchange. With each passing day, our understanding of food deepens, our culinary horizons broaden, and our palates remain challenged and even sometimes shocked. This book, then, serves as a testament to the human spirit's incredible adaptability, its endless inventiveness, and its unwavering commitment to creating something, well, something at least relatively edible, even when all available resources were decidedly not in our favor. It's a story of survival, of innovation, of adapting to circumstances that would make even the most seasoned survivalist think twice about trying some of these culinary attempts. So, to the reader who has journeyed with me through this often gruesome, often hilarious, and always fascinating journey, bon appétit, or perhaps more accurately, bonne digestion. May your future meals be less adventurous, infinitely cleaner, and wholly devoid of rats. And may this book serve as a lasting and hopefully not too nauseating reminder of the long and winding road our culinary history has taken to arrive at the relatively safe and sanitary meals we consume today. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I'll go treat myself to a thoroughly modern, perfectly hygienic, and utterly delicious meal. Something without even a hint of rat or stale bread. Consider the sheer audacity of some of the culinary creations that made it into this book, the sheer amount of resourcefulness, even desperation involved. We've examined dishes that were so far removed from anything remotely palatable in the modern sense that it's a testament to the resilience of the human digestive system that medieval people survived at all, let alone thrived. But let's not get too melancholic about the somewhat questionable past of food. Let's instead remember that the progress we've made is considerable. Think about the vast difference between a medieval kitchen and our modern one, the leaps and bounds we've made in terms of hygiene, technology, understanding of nutrition, and of course, taste. We now have refrigerators, airtight containers, knowledge of microbiology and food safety, and the ability to obtain a diverse range of foodstuffs from around the globe. So let's raise a glass to the past, the present, and the future of culinary endeavors, to innovation, to ingenuity, to the sheer will to survive on questionable food, and to the remarkable progress that has led to the culinary delights available to us today. Here's to a future of delicious, safe, and hopefully rat-free meals. And finally, a word of caution. After digesting all the information contained within these pages, you might find yourself experiencing some unusual cravings, perhaps a sudden hankering for a particularly pungent cheese, or an inexplicable desire to sample a medieval stew. I strongly advise against it. If this happens, don't worry. It's a common side effect of studying medieval food history. Just remember the lessons you've learned, grab a thoroughly modern and hygienic meal, and thank the heavens for modern food safety regulations. May your future culinary adventures be filled with joy, flavor, and a complete absence of anything remotely reminiscent of the medieval diet. Cheers and good digestion.